Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the year-end Escarosa Anti-Trafficking Conference, brought to you by Gulf Coast Kids House, the Nisi Project, and our sponsors for the day, Levin Papantonio Rafferty Law Firm. We are so excited to have you here today. My name is Sarah Lefevers, president of the Nisi Project, and I get the privilege of being your MC today. So I'll be with you throughout the day, learning and enjoying the conference alongside of you. This educational conference is possible through a grant by the National Children's Alliance to our partners at Gulf Coast Kids House. It has allowed us over the past few months to create a human trafficking multidisciplinary response team. What is that, you may ask? Well, this MDRT for Escambia and Santa Rosa counties allows us, alongside of law enforcement, our child agencies, Department of Children and Family Services, and other victim service providers to create a coordinated response to human trafficking, specifically with an emphasis on minor victims. And so we are so excited to have the first phase of this lunch here today with this educational conference. There will be so much more to come regarding this MDRT in the future, including 2 annual anti-trafficking conferences like the one we're joined for today. Today's live conference is streamed to thousands across country, and we hope you invited your friends as we learn how we can help our communities prevent and raise awareness against human trafficking. Let's go ahead and go into today's agenda. First, we're going to hear from Todd Thompson, President and CEO of the Greater Pensacola Chamber of Commerce, who's going to update us what's going on with the business community to combat human trafficking across the nation and here in Pensacola, Florida. Followed by Todd, we'll be joined by Florida's first congressional representative, Michelle Solomon. Michelle has been an advocate for the Pensacola anti-trafficking community for many years, and she is a force in Tallahassee. Following Michelle at 8:30, Holly Jeffries is going to join us to discuss child adverse experiences. And then at 9:30, Corporal Alan Wilkett will be revealing trend trafficking, and we'll be joined by Danny Pinter, who's going to have a very interesting case study that you're not going to want to miss. Following Danny, we'll hear from Levin Papantonio Rafferty Law Firm, who will give an introduction and update regarding civil litigation on behalf of survivors of human trafficking. The team at Levin Papantonio Rafferty is dedicated to justice for victims and ensuring that survivors of sex trafficking have the ability to file claims against third parties under the TVPRA. We'll find out more about that later. Participants will have an opportunity to learn more about litigation against companies such as websites and hotels that benefit from and may even facilitate human trafficking. And then finally, at 11 a.m., we're going to have a group of very powerful women be on a survivors panel that's facilitated by our own Kelsey Hill, founder of Beyond Beauty. Lastly, we want to take a few minutes to introduce you to our team who helped put this event together. As I mentioned, we are so thankful for our team at the Nisi Project, specifically our administrative coordinator, Anna Grace Carrick, and our dedicated members of the MDRT. A major round of emoji applause, and yes, we will be asking for many emoji applause throughout the day for our partners at Gulf Coast Kids House for their continued advocacy, and a major thank you again to Levin Papantonio Rafferty Law Firm. Their continued support is always appreciated. With that, we want to share with you another free training that is very important to our community in as little as 30 minutes. 30 minutes, y'all, that's it. You can learn how to recognize, report, and reduce child abuse and child trafficking in our community. This training is free and it could potentially save a life. Now we're going to showcase a video from Gulf Coast Kids House from their No Abuse campaign. Let's go ahead and watch.
No, child abuse affects 1 in 10 children in Escambia County.
I didn't know. Most children are abused by someone they know and trust.
Because I didn't know child abuse.
But now I know.
I know I can prevent child abuse from happening in my community.
I know I can prevent a kid from experiencing the same trauma that I experienced. I know child abuse.
Save a child's life. No child abuse.
We are so thankful for our partners over at Gulf Coast Kids House. Stacy Kostovicki, thank you to you and your team. None of this would be possible without your initiative in this site, and we're just so thankful for you. and all you do for the children in our community. Okay, so now we're going to get started with the next part of our program. We're going to hear first, as I mentioned, from Greater Pensacola Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Todd Thompson about what the business community is doing to provide education on human trafficking to our business leaders. Please help me give a warm round of applause to Todd Thompson.
Good morning, and thank you, Sarah, for that warm welcome. I'm Todd Thompson, President and CEO of the Greater Pensacola Chamber of Commerce, and I'm really proud to be a part of this event today. This is an important issue that the business community needs to be engaged in and needs to be a supportive partner in creating solutions that will protect our children. I'm going to give you a brief overview of some things that are happening on the federal and local level with human trafficking. On the federal level, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a task force to end human trafficking. The mission of this task force is to educate stakeholders, lawmakers, government officials, the public at large with what is happening with human trafficking, the role they can play in making good policy on the federal level, and events like this that can educate them on what they can do to be a part of the solution. Our Greater Pensacola Chamber of Commerce team has played a small role in one of these events last January, and we look forward to doing that again in the future. So why the business community? Well, the business community obviously touches all parts of our society and confronts a host of legal, financial, cultural challenges to ensure that we don't make the situation worse. We want to be a part of the solution. So, for example, companies have global operations, not just here in the United States, but touching other countries. And business partners, they should develop strategies and programs to address trafficking, to try to acknowledge what's happening and develop those strategies to work together. Specifically, companies who are, again, working across state or country lines, there's, things happen where there's fraud, there's force, there's coercion. So businesses like Walmart and UPS have proved to be invaluable resources for sharing their strategies and what they've done to address this. And it's important that we share those strategies with other businesses as well. Business owners need to take a responsibility in knowing some of the products they're selling. Also, if a business has a third-party partner or subs that they're using, it is their responsibility to educate those partners on trafficking and what they need to be on the lookout for to make sure that we minimize the trafficking. So what's happening at the local level? So let me just tell you, since 2019 here, the Greater Pensacola Chamber of Commerce, we entered into an MOU with the Circuit 1 Human Trafficking Task Force here locally. And in this partnership, the Greater Pensacola Chamber Foundation is able to equip the task force with resources and fundraising capabilities, in addition to providing our business members with direct access to anti-trafficking experts and education opportunities, much like this one. In return, task force helps keep us and our members updated, educated, and responsible. We are grateful for what this partnership has meant to us and our community, and we look forward to continuing this for years to come. It is now my privilege to introduce State Representative Michelle Salzman from House District 1. Representative Salzman has been engaged with this issue for years and has been a great partner for us. Welcome, Representative Salzman.
Well, thank you, Todd. Good morning, everybody. I'm honored to be here and be a part of this great event today. As Todd said, I've been a part of this conversation for a very long time. We had, as PTA, been working on the human trafficking conversation for probably close to 10 years now. I remember whenever the Human Trafficking Task Force was created, where it was required to have them in every community. And I remember going to the first meeting and thinking, wow, look at all of these partners. So that was just a few short years ago. And we have certainly come a long way in just advocacy and awareness. And, you know, the partnership with Gulf Coast Kids House and the school district has been instrumental in really raising that awareness and breaking the stigma, teaching people what it really means, what human trafficking really means, and what that looks like in the community, and how that translates into everyone's home. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm very proud of the efforts that NISI has been spearheading in Pensacola through Sarah Lefevre's, as well as the chamber, you know, getting on board. And we have just one of the best chambers, so we're fortunate in that as well. Just some background for Florida, as I'm bringing the the Florida state representatives perspective to this conversation. Florida ranks third and highest of reported human trafficking cases in the U.S. In just 2018, Florida received 767 reports of human trafficking, and 14 of those were minors. And what we have to understand is these numbers aren't very new. They're older, and we know that it just gets worse and worse every year. But what you also need to understand is that's what's reported. We don't get near what actually happens being reported. And that's kind of why the Gulf Coast Kids House and NISI and other organizations are so instrumental, because we need that awareness campaign so people can start reporting it. So I would imagine these numbers to be much, much higher. This year alone, I'm personally carrying a $500,000 request for the Secret Home Place Advocacy Center. So basically, if we get that funding, the state will have invested in a local community effort for anti-human trafficking. So that's one of the pieces of legislation that I'm carrying. I also partner with the organizations in the community and help provide them resources and connect them to other agencies when they have any questions or they need anything valuable to help them. That's kind of why I'm here. Some other legislation that has been introduced in the state this year is from several folks. This goes across party lines. This isn't a Republican or a Democrat conversation. This is a conversation for all Floridians. We have one by Representative Overdorf that would require direct support organizations of statewide Council on Human Trafficking to develop training for spires. I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. It would require that a portion of State Council on Human Trafficking organization personnel identifying information of donors, if discussed, and provides anonymity for said donors in the request. So basically, it's just strengthening the human trafficking language for the community and the state. We also have Representative Skidmore, who is trying to redefine the definition of coercion. So it would increase penalties for those engaging or benefit from human trafficking. We have Rodriguez, which is one of my favorite reps. He has introduced legislation that would authorize a victim of human trafficking to bring a civil action against specific people and provides no statute of limitation. So there's statute of limitations on some of these things. And as we're learning how this process works, we realize that some of these things just take time to really uncover. So that's a really cool piece of legislation. We'll be watching out for that. And then Diaz has a piece of legislation. If it would pass, it would make confidential the personal identifying information of a victim of human trafficking in a petition for victim expunction and all documents related. So that sounds really legal and blah, blah, blah. But basically, in the middle of proceedings, sometimes things are public record, and we're just trying to fix that so we can't access some of that information for some of these victims that really should be protected. So those are some pieces of legislation that we're working on in the House, as well as the Senate in the state. And then also last year, just wanted to let you guys know, because I want y'all to know that we really in the state are trying hard to be good partners in this conversation. We've worked diligently every year. We have conversations on the House floor. We have conversations in committee. We are working so hard to make sure that that awareness campaign is there, and that we are doing what we should be doing and being good partners as a state entity for our local communities to help protect all Floridians. So last year, a really cool bill that was signed into law, so it actually did pass, was it made it so communication between human trafficking victim advocates or trained volunteers and human trafficking victims would be confidential. So some circumstances, remember we talked about that, just a few minutes ago, I mentioned some of these pieces of the process are not confidential just because just glitches, in the bill and law. We make a law, we think it's a great idea, and we don't really understand that we haven't covered the full gambit of it. So that was something that it did. It also expanded the definition of human trafficking to include purchasing, patronizing, or procuring. So another person for the purposes of exploitation. So basically, it expanded the definition of what it means to be included in that process, because a lot of people could easily say, oh, well, I just did this and that. I wasn't the one that did X. So what we're trying to do as a legislature is make sure that if you're engaged in this process in any way, that you are also held accountable. So that was another good component of that bill. And it also changed the fees administered to victims in court and court supervision policies. So basically, it was just trying to remove some of those fees so that everybody didn't have to pay all this extra money. Florida also in 2019 became the first state in the United States to teach K through 12 child trafficking prevention. So the State Board of Education unanimously required that students had to learn the hazards of human trafficking and how to protect themselves from dangerous predators, especially online. Finally, December 1st each year, each school district must submit an implementation plan to the commissioner to include methods of instruction, information on information on the person instructing, materials, and establish that every school in Florida should be a child trafficking free zone. And that's kind of where the Gulf Coast Kids House comes in. We talked about that as well. They are the agency, the entity that is the one that goes into all of these schools and teaches this piece. So it's a really critical component. As you can see now, that it is a state required, it's mandated that we allow this to happen. So congratulations to the state for understanding and recognizing, as well as the Gulf Coast Kids House for stepping up. They always step up. So I just want to say thank you again for having me on here today. And I tell you, I appreciate all of your efforts. And if you have any questions or any ideas on things that we should be doing at the state level, feel free to reach out. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you for everything that you and your counterparts are doing at the state level to make sure that victims are heard and that we have awareness around this important issue. It's making a huge difference here in Florida that's being seen across the country. And we appreciate you leading that charge there at the state level. And so thank you. Now is a great opportunity. We've heard about a lot of things that are going on at the federal and state and local level outside of the anti-trafficking community, but to help the anti-trafficking community. So we want to provide you with a few resources that you may not be aware of here in our community that can be super helpful for you. Of course, we would be remiss not to mention our Circuit 1 Human Trafficking Task Force. This is the organization that is established by the Office of the Attorney General for our Circuit 1 area. And so if you want to be involved in learning more about anti-trafficking, be connected to service providers for volunteer opportunities, or be more engaged in the fight, please reach out to the Circuit 1 Human Trafficking Task Force. You see their social media channels on the screen. You can also reach out to them at their email address, which is co1ahtt@gmail.com. Again, co1ahtt@gmail.com. Gretchen Busby, chair of the Circuit 1 Human Trafficking Task Force, can get you in touch with the proper channels to become a member of that task force. Next are 3 resources that are vetted and are so helpful for the educational purposes and making sure that you have correct information. There's so much information out there on the internet about anti-trafficking and so many different statistics, so it's very hard to navigate. So these are 3 resources that we would definitely recommend to you. The first, NCMEC, or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. NCMEC serves as the nation's nonprofit clearinghouse and comprehensive reporting center for all issues related to prevention and recovery from child victimization. They have so many valuable resources that can equip you on how to identify and report. And of course, you can reach out to them and find more at missingkids.org. Speaking of reporting, I want everyone to take out their phones right now. I know you all have them right there. Please put this phone number in your phone as a contact. You can put the contact name as Human Trafficking hotline or human trafficking number. This is the number you want to call if you have suspected trafficking or if you have identified some red flags and you either want confirmation if you're correct or next step guidance. But it also helps identify the proper law enforcement channels to be able to respond. So please reach out to National Human Trafficking Hotline. Phone number again is 888-3737. 888, or again, their website is also humantraffickinghotline.org. And then if you're a parent, law enforcement, or anyone seeking resources to protect your kids online, thorn.org is the place to go. Y'all, their parent toolkit is a must-have in your resource pocket. So please make sure you visit thorn.org. You can find under the issue tab that information, and it's so vital and so helpful for parents that are just trying to protect their kids online. It's very difficult to do that nowadays, as you may know, and so it's a great resource to have. Okay, so up next is a session on the pathways to slavery, the ACEs to Trafficking Pipeline with the ACE Institute founder, Holly Jeffrey. Holly has spent the last 19 years protecting and advocating for abused and neglected children. She is the founder of the ACE Institute, an organization committed to helping survivors of child abuse thrive through education and equipping communities and professionals on how to prevent and respond to child abuse and neglect, but in a trauma-informed way. Please help me welcome to the stage, Holly Jeffrey.
Okay, can y'all hear me?
We can, Holly. Thank you so much.
Everybody hear me? We good?
Yes.
I'm so sorry, y'all. These technical difficulties can get us sometimes, but just roll with the punches. That's what we do in this
That's
field.
right.
So I'm excited to be on here with everybody, and thank you, Sarah, for asking me to be with you guys. Just to share a little bit about myself, I'm from Mississippi, and I'm a social worker for the last 20 years. About 20 years, I graduated from the University of Mississippi. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew that God called me to help. And I never wanted to work in child protection or child advocacy. Right? And but I lived in a small town, and I'd applied for all of these jobs, and I was not getting people calling me back. And so I had to pray one day and say, okay, God, obviously you have something different for me to do. So you open the job up that you want me to have. And about 2 weeks later, I get this telephone call from Child Protection Service offering me a job. The funny thing was, I never actually applied with them. I never filled out an application. I'd never put my name on a card and turned it in. How they got my number to call me was a mystery for a long time. I finally found out later that they had called the university, and the university knew that I was looking. I never applied with them. So when you're applying for jobs and no one's calling you back, and you pray, and the you did not apply because you did not calls you when you didn't apply and says, hey, we want you to come work for us, I knew it was calling on my life at that point, which was, it had to be a calling, right? Because this is a hard job. This is a hard profession to go into. So on the hard days, I had to go back and remind myself, Holly, God has called you to do this, and he will give you the strength to get through this. And so here I am 19 years later, and I have the honor and the privilege of speaking to you guys today about something that God has put on my heart. I am single, I have no dog, no husband, I have no kids. And so I get to do this profession and pour my whole heart and soul into this. And about a year ago, God put it on my heart to open. So let me get my presentation pulled up. He called me to open the ACE Institute, and part of that had to do with my experiences working in protection services for 14 years and working with the child advocacy centers for 4 years. My experiences with survivors of child abuse and trafficking is that they do not thrive. All the different things that have happened to them has impacted their life in such a way that they do not thrive. And God put it on my heart that his desire for all of us is that we would thrive despite what has happened to us. And that's biblical. That comes from Isaiah 61:3, where he says, "To all who mourn, I will give you a crown of beauty for ashes, a joyous blessing instead of mourning. Instead of shame, I will give you double honor and prosperity." And it was like he was putting on my heart saying, I want my children to thrive. And the way that he does that is through working through us, who are these professionals. And he gives us these talents and these gifts and these skills and this knowledge. And he tells us in Isaiah 58, that true religion to him is that we help others, that we serve others, that we serve the least of these, we the captives free. And he tells us in Isaiah 58:10 that when we help others, we become the light in a very dark world. And what we know for survivors of trafficking and for survivors of child abuse and neglect, the world can be very, very, very dark for them. And he has given us these hearts and he's given us these gifts and these talents to be this light. He tells us in Matthew 25 that the kingdom of God is like this king who gives his people and his servants these talents, and he wants us to steward them well. And so the idea behind ACE Institute was two things. One, we are to empower these survivors so that they can thrive. And we do that by stewarding this light, stewarding these, and our light is these gifts and these talents and these skills that he's given us. And what I want to do is help you steward your light well, steward your talents well, give you the tools and the research and the data and the knowledge that you need to be able to serve these survivors in a way that they thrive. And so that's the heart behind ACE Institute. And taking that and going into talking about ACEs. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. There is a lot of research that's been done in the last 40 years that talks about trauma and how trauma impacts our developing minds and our developing bodies and our developing brains, and how it has long-term lasting impacts on our life that are not good. And so when I talk about God's heart is for us to thrive, and we're not thriving because of the things that can happen to us in childhood. And so this is a really good visual example of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And what happened was, while there was a study done in the 1990s on adverse childhood experiences, that was done through a medical practice that was treating bariatric patients. These were morbidly obese patients who were suffering from chronic diseases, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, and they were going to get treatment from these doctors for bariatric surgery. But what the doctors found was that a lot of these people would regain this weight and they would not be able to keep this weight loss off. And so, but as they were working with these patients, they started noticing kind of trend among these patients, and it was that they had a lot of childhood trauma. So they developed this childhood experiences study to see how many of them had these traumas. And we're fixing to take a test in a minute to see how many of these traumas you have. But this particular study only looked at household traumas. It looked at maternal depression, emotional and sexual abuse, substance abuse, domestic violence, homelessness, incarceration, mental illness, divorce, and physical and emotional neglect in the home. This one study only looked at what was going on in a child's home. Now, later on, there were studies done on adverse community environments. That's a different kind of ACEs. And that's talking about poverty and discrimination and community, things that are going on outside the home, but in that child's community. But for the most part, what we're going to talk about today is what is happening inside the homes of these children and the long-term impacts these adverse childhood experiences are having. So these are the 10 questions. You can, in this study, you can score a score of 10. Okay, so these were the 10 questions that were asked. Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you or have you touch their body in a sexual way or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you in your home? This is about you in your home, not out in the community at school, but this is actually, did this actually happen to you in your home? Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or used street drugs? Was a household member depressed or mentally ill? Or did a household member attempt suicide? Did a household member go to prison? So those were the 10 questions. And so, or those were part of the 10 questions, I'm sorry. So looking at those 10 different questions, you can get an ACE score of 10. And what we found was the higher your ACE score, the more likely you were to have some pretty significant long-term impacts from pretty significant long-term impacts of that could carry on long-term across the lifespan of your life. So what they found in this ACE study is that 61% of adults reported that they had at least one ACE. 61% reported were non-Hispanic Black children. 40% in this study were white children. 51% were Hispanic children. Girls were more likely than boys to have ACEs in their household. The cost of ACEs, $401 billion across federal spending, state spending, local spending, $401 billion of child abuse related ACEs, special education, all of these different entities that we've had to create that to reduce the impact of ACEs or to address the impacts of ACEs. I have a couple of slides that look like they have gone missing. One of the slides on here that is not popping up has a statistic that 1 out of 5 people have 3 or more ACEs. That's huge. That tells us that a lot of us have experienced some of these things in our home. Another statistic talks about to go from an ACE score of 3 to an ACE score of 4 increases your chance of becoming an intravenous drug abuser by 1,400%. So just having one more childhood trauma in your home increases the likelihood of you going from maybe taking something like marijuana or something like that, and then going into intravenous drug abuse like heroin or something of that nature. It increases the likelihood that you're going to die early. Suicide is a major factor the higher your ACE score. So the higher the ACE score, the more likely you are to die by the age of 60. ACEs have been connected with the top 5 leading causes of death in the United States: heart disease, lung disease, 2 types of cancer, and diabetes. So when we're looking at ACEs and their long-term impacts, it's not just things that are happening to children in their homes at that time, but it's creating inside these children toxic stress. It's creating maladaptive coping mechanisms that leads into adulthood, that leads into risky behaviors, that leads to unhealthy lifestyles because they're trying to cope with what happened to them as children. It's creating these vulnerabilities and it's leading them down this path of early death, and it impacts their relationships. So it has all of these long-term negative impacts on their life. It can also lead to something that we call complex trauma. When we're looking at these adverse childhood experiences, this child trauma in the home, you can't get away from that. This is not going to the store one day and somebody inappropriately touches you at the store that one time and it never happens again. These are chronic things that are happening in the home. So the frequency goes up. The duration of how long this lasts can last for years. The intensity increases. And so when we have an increase in intensity, duration, and frequency, that's going to create something called complex trauma in these children. And that really impacts them across all areas of their life. It's going to impact them socially. It's going to impact them at school. It's going to impact them relationally. It's going to impact them emotionally. And it can have impacts on them physically when we're talking about physical abuse and sexual abuse. It also creates this thing, the neurobiology behind this, the physiology behind this is that it creates these pathways in the brain to be hardwired to react from its limbic system, the fight, flight, or freeze system. So the children are developing, what they're trying to do is to stay safe. They're trying to scan their environment for threats at all times. And so their limbic system brain takes over and their prefrontal cortex brain is not able to function. And so their brains literally become hardwired to safety and survival instead of learning and exploring. So they kind of stay stuck in this mode of constantly looking over their shoulder for the next threat. It can cause sleep disturbances. It can cause physical pain in their bodies. It can cause increased heart rate and racing thoughts and nausea and dizziness and exhaustion. It can create emotional dysregulation. They don't know how to regulate all of these different emotions that they're feeling because they don't have someone in their home helping them learn how to cope in a productive way. So they've developed all of these maladaptive coping mechanisms. And physiologically, their bodies feel like they're in danger at all time and have them on hyper alert and hyper awareness and hypervigilance at all times. This turns off their learning brains. This turns off their prefrontal cortex. And so it really can cause issues with problem solving. It can cause issues with impulsivity. It can cause a lot of issues with learning. And so what we see in the school systems is that they are labeled as behavior problems. They are labeled as learning disabilities. And our systems, school system, law enforcement, child protection services, foster care system, all of these different systems have not really been designed well enough to understand the neurobiology and the physiology of what this trauma is doing to children. And so we often end up labeling these children other things. They're often diagnosed with other things like conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder when it really is trauma. It really relates back to these adverse childhood experiences that are going on in their homes. And if they're misdiagnosed, the treatment plans that are made for them and the educational plans and the behavioral modification plans that are made for them do not work because those types of plans have targeted the prefrontal cortex and not the limbic system. And so working in this field for 19 years, I've seen lots and lots and lots of children over medicated. leading into adult life, they are medicating themselves. They're taking prescription drugs. They're using illegal substances to cope with what has happened to them. They're smoking, they're drinking, they're engaging in some of these risky behaviors, and that's what's leading to early death. That's what's leading to these chronic illnesses. That's what's leading to cancer and these things that will lead to the early death. So this is a picture of the brain, and it's a little fuzzy, but in the front part of our brain, that's our executive functioning part of our brain. That's where we problem solve. That's what we use to kind of weigh the pros and cons of a situation. That's where we learn. That part of your brain is turned off when you're living in a traumatic environment and you're trying to just survive. What does turn on is the limbic system and the brain stem. And so many of these children are living in the limbic system and brain stem, and they never get their prefrontal cortex to turn on. And so as they grow into adults, they never learn to problem solve. They never learn how to do complex things. This is going to lead to them having issues with finding jobs. It's going to lead to them having issues maintaining stable relationships. And what that creates is a lot of vulnerabilities: homelessness, joblessness, bouncing from place to place. It's going to create those mental health issues. It's going to create issues with the legal systems: youth court, family court, criminal courts. It's going to create very complex family dynamics where you might be living with relatives, or you've got you might be abandoned by your family. You might be separated from your siblings. You have all of this generational trauma that kind of follows you along. You may have issues like food insecurity, or not enough clothes, or your clothes are too big, or your clothes are too small. That leads to bullying at school. Housing insecure, bouncing from place to place to place to place. I have tons of former foster children that have aged out of the system that I work with, and they're almost all homeless. They have no stable place to live at all. It creates hygiene issues. Remember, these adverse childhood experiences are happening in the home and can include physical neglect, emotional neglect. You feel unloved, you feel unwanted, you don't have your needs met. Now you're going into school and you're getting bullied. You have all this trauma in your life, and it's diagnosed as a mental illness, and you're mislabeled, and you're put on this medication. You're getting into trouble with the youth court. So you've got all of these challenges, one after another, that you're having to try to overcome, because this is happening in your home. And your home is supposed to be your safe place, right? But for these children, home is not a safe place. Hold on one second, what's happening? There we go. I knew I was missing some of my slides. So how do we, let me make sure I've covered everything. This is the brain of a child who has experienced neglect. And so we can look at the brain on the left as the brain of a normal child who was raised in a normal home. And on the right is the brain of a Romanian orphan who was raised in an orphanage where there was a lot of neglect. And so you can see through these brain scans, these children are the same age. When a child is raised in a healthy, safe home environment, the brain develops like it's supposed to. The prefrontal cortex is a lot more developed, and that child feels safe, and we see normal brain activity. In that neglected child, we don't see that. We see a lot of gaps for that child. That's going to follow that child into life later on, and it's really going to impact their ability to take care of themselves and make healthy choices. Then we have the issue of chronic toxic stress. These traumas And living from the brainstem and living from the limbic system creates all of these hormones, all of these chemicals in our bodies that's only supposed to be released into our body, like adrenaline and cortisol, when we're under stress. We're not supposed to be under chronic stress. And so for these chemicals and these things to be released into our body on a chronic basis means that our body has all this stuff kind of going around in it, and it's wreaking havoc on the inside of our body. It can cause immune issues where we're getting sick. In my own personal life, when my dad died, my mom, it was very traumatic for my mom. And she stayed sick for 2 years. Just the stress of my dad passing away impacted her immune system for almost 2 years. She was going to the doctor all the time with something going on. And so when we're looking at these kids and they're living under this stress chronically, it really is impacting their body physiologically and is impacting their immune system. And so how do we mitigate that? We mitigate that through trying to find safe and stable and nurturing relationships. And that's hard when the place that you're supposed to receive that is your home, but it's your home that is causing all of this chronic stress. So we've got the chronic toxic stress, we've got all of the other challenges that they're having to go through. Then for some of these kids, it's so stressful and so abusive at home that they're having to be removed, and they're coming into the foster care system. And I really wish that I could say the foster care system is rainbows and roses and ponies, but it's not. These are some statistics, some long-term statistics of the outcomes of kids who go into foster care and age out of the system. These are the kids that don't get adopted or they don't go back home. They have remained in the system for multiple years, and because of their complex trauma, because of just kind of the general issues of being in foster care, these kids were never put into a foster home that adopted them. Relatives did not adopt them, and they were not reunified with these families. So these are the kids that age out of the system. More than 23,000 of these children age out of the system every year. 7 out of 10 of these are 7 out of 10 girls who age out of the system will become pregnant by the age of 21. 60% of boys who age out have been convicted of a crime. 70% of these kids want to go to college, but only 1 in 4 will graduate. I've seen tons of these kids not be able to get their GED or graduate from high school because they're bouncing around so much in the foster care system. They would like to go to college. They have the resources to go to college, but they can't access college because they don't have their high school diploma or their GED when they get out of custody. 1 in 2 will develop a substance dependence disorder, not just substance use, but it will become a dependency. And so their outcomes are not very good. Life in foster care for some of these kids, when I was the director of therapeutic placement in Mississippi, we had some kids that had over 80 placements in foster care. So not only were you abused at home, not only did you experience all of these adverse childhood experiences in your home, now you've come into the foster care system, you have complex trauma, and you are bouncing from place to place to place to place to place. You have over 80 placements. That's 80 times that someone has told you, you can't be here. We can't take care of you. You're not good enough. And you start to put all these labels all over you. Some of them are being abused and neglected in the system. Other children are abusing them, or foster parents are abusing them. I'm working with one survivor whose adoptive father, who was a pastor, sexually abused her for years. They're over medicated a lot of times because that's the only way the system knows how to control some of the behaviors that they're seeing. Sometimes the foster parents will tell them that they only have them so that they can get their board payment. And they have no choices and no control over anything in their life. And it's very frustrating, very traumatic for them to be in foster care. Challenges that some of these foster children experience. We've talked about complex trauma. They have a lot of social problems. Bouncing from place to place, it's hard for them to make friends. And after a while, they stop. Our brains are designed to protect us. And so our brains will shut off building relationships with people to protect us from being rejected again, to protect us from getting hurt again. So physiologically, not just emotionally, we will shut down and stop trying to build relationships with other people just because it hurts too much. And so these kids are coming from places where their parents didn't want them, the family was dysfunctional, there was abuse and neglect going on inside their homes. Now they're entering into a foster system where they're being told over and over again by schools, by foster parents, by their workers, that, and this isn't every foster home, this isn't every worker, this is not every school, but for some children, they pulled the short end of the stick and got that bad worker who was abusive to them, or that one time they got into that foster home and that foster home was abusive, or that one time they went to that school. I have had to deal with schools who were trying to get my children kicked out of their school because they didn't want my kids in their school because it brought their scores down. It brought the school's scores down. And so we have had to battle all these different systems to get the services that we've needed for these kids. And these kids can be very, very challenging, but they're challenging because of what trauma has done to them developmentally. And our systems have to be more informed on trauma. That these kids are not just being bad kids, but they have been labeled bad kids for a long time. And we've got to get rid of this language of that they're bad and start understanding the neurobiology and the physiology of trauma and what it's doing to these kids, and how can we create these safe places for kids. Then we've got the fears of abandonment and rejection. The kids that I work with, I worked with them 0 to 18 while I worked for Child Protection Services. Now I work with the ones who have aged out, and it doesn't go away. They have this huge fear of abandonment and rejection. I've got one who won't keep a job much longer than a month because about the time she kind of gets settled in and she's been working there for a month or two, she starts getting real uneasy. She's developed kind of this sixth sense of kind of scanning her environment for threats. And anytime she feels any kind of emotional shift with a coworker, or maybe someone doesn't like her, or she's not getting along with a coworker or something, she will leave that job. And so it's hard for her to maintain housing and pay bills and stay stable in her living situation when she's job to job, and she's bouncing from job to job to job because she has this fear of abandonment and this fear of rejection from other people. So it really impacts her socially, which is having a huge impact on her ability to take care of herself. There is a higher rate of suicide in foster children. And so what the ACE study has shown, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, there is a higher rate of suicide among all ACE survivors, not just those who enter foster care. No, not all ACE survivors enter foster care. Only kind of the worst of the worst actually come into foster care. Many of them actually still live at home in the environment that's abusive or neglectful, or there's these traumas that are going on that are chronic. So the ACE study has already shown that there's a much higher rate of suicide in those who have ACEs. The higher your score, the more likely you are to commit suicide. Add entering into foster care to that, and your rate of suicide really increases at that point. So foster children are 3 to 5 times more likely to commit suicide. So having these things happen to you really increases the long-term negative impacts on your life, and it creates vulnerabilities. When I was working with the FBI, I didn't work for them, but they came to us when I worked at CPS to set up operations to try to find missing foster children. I was doing some research on their website and learning more about trafficking, and one of the statistics that I found was that 6 out of 10 survivors that are rescued by the FBI are foster children, or they have a case open with CPS. This should tell us something, that these kids have these vulnerabilities that make them susceptible to becoming trafficked. Within the foster care system, there is this kind of subset of kids that have complex trauma, they're harder to place, and they are placed in what we call therapy foster care. This means that their emotional and behavioral and medical needs put them in a higher level of care bracket. They need extra supervision, they need extra therapeutic care, they need extra services because they are really overwhelmed with what has happened to them. And so these kids who are in therapeutic foster care, who have these more exceptional needs, have a they run away at a percent of 44%. They run away 44% more than just kind of those that are in a regular foster home. And what do we know about teenage runaways? That increases their likelihood of being trafficked, right? And so what's happening is these kids, they're experiencing all of this abuse and neglect and trauma at home. It's impacting their ability to emotionally regulate. It's impacting their ability to cope. It's impacting their ability to have relationships. It's creating all of these vulnerabilities that make them more susceptible to trafficking. They're entering into foster care where they're being rejected a lot, where they're bounced around. That puts them in this need for this higher level of care. And so they are a very vulnerable population when it comes to becoming trafficked. And what we're seeing from the FBI and other rescue organizations that work to rescue these kids, many of them have run away from the foster care system. So what am I saying? I'm saying that trauma has a sound. Trauma looks like and sounds like a kid with bad behavior, right? We've mislabeled them for a long time. It sounds like a kid who has a juvenile justice record. It sounds like a kid who might be in alternative school. It sounds like a kid who will scream at you and cuss at you and get upset and throw chairs in the classroom. It sounds like this kid who runs away from their foster home. Um, but what we've typically not done is we've not heard it as trauma. We've heard it as bad. We've heard it as promiscuous. We've labeled them as something else. We've labeled them delinquent instead of hearing what it is they're trying to tell us. All of these behaviors are telling us something. And we as professionals and as the community have got to start listening to the behaviors we're seeing. Let me say that again. We have to start listening to the behaviors we're seeing and recognizing that there is a hurt in there, that there is a trauma down there that needs to be addressed. We need to see the vulnerabilities that this is creating, because when we don't see it, the trafficker does. And they're beating us at our own game. When I have foster children who will run away from their foster home to go to a trafficker, we aren't doing something right. And it's happening every day. That trafficker is giving that child something that the foster care system or their own home is not giving them. And we've got to do better at figuring out what it is that trafficker is doing. These ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences in the community, in the home, have created vulnerabilities in these children. If they're bouncing from place to place and place and they don't have a stable home, if they feel unloved and unwanted, if they don't feel like they belong, if they don't feel safe, they're going to be looking for those things. Maslow talked about this when he created his hierarchy of needs. He said, basically, before you can reach self-actualization, before you can thrive, before you can get to that place where you are at your best, you have to meet all of these needs. First, you have to have your physiological needs met: food, clothing, shelter. The next need is safety, and the next need is belonging. What we know with these kids who are being abused or neglected at home, who have these adverse childhood experiences in their home, food, shelter, clothing, safety, and belonging are not there. And our home is the place where we're supposed to have all of those things. Our home is our fort, right? If we're living in a forest of bears, and there's bears everywhere, and the forest is our community, our home is supposed to be our safe space where we can go into our home to get away from the bears, right? Well, what do you do when the bears live with you in your home? You have no safe place. And so that really impacts us. And so these kids grow up focused on surviving. So they may give up safety in order to have their physiological needs met. I've had foster children who had safety in a foster home, but for some reason, the foster home made them feel unsafe, and they felt like they could do a better job of taking care of themselves living out on the streets with a trafficker. And they will run away from that foster home because that trafficker has told them, I will meet your needs. I will keep you safe. They don't want you, I do. Because I promise you, every time the trafficker will take that kid back, but the foster home will kick them out. You act like this here, you can't stay here. You don't follow my rules, you can't stay here. That's a rejection. But the trafficker will take them every time. And so you may have your physiological needs met, you may feel safe, but if you don't feel like you belong anywhere, that trafficker may offer you that sense of belonging that you've never felt at home and that you don't feel at the foster home. So these adverse childhood experiences create all of these vulnerabilities, and it gives these traffickers something to exploit. They are like hawks on a light line looking for the little mouse down there. They're like a lion looking for that weak animal in the herd. They have this skill of looking into the crowd and seeing the vulnerable. They have this skill of developing these relationships with these kids and finding the vulnerabilities. Once you kind of develop that skill, it's easy. All of us have vulnerabilities. All of us have insecurities. All of us have these needs that we need to have met. And traffickers are experts at finding the vulnerability, the loneliness, maybe the homelessness, and they're going to exploit it to get that child to trust them, to come to them. They're going to make that child feel safe. I'll protect you. I'll love you. I'll always want you. And the children believe it. And so they run to it. They're going to meet the basic needs of those kids. You've got this kid growing up in poverty, and they've never had name brand shoes. They've never had an iPhone. They've never had a Gucci purse. They've never had these things that the other kids have. And so, you know, the trafficker's going to come in and meet that need. So how do we beat them is the question. And I think we've got to get just as good as the trafficker at meeting those children's needs, understanding what their vulnerabilities are, and offering them that safe space, offering them those physiological and safety and belonging needs that they're not getting at home. We have to be better at prevention and making sure that homes have the resources in the community that they need to mitigate all of these adverse childhood experiences that are going on in their homes. If it's neglect, are there services that can help them meet the needs of their kids? If it's abuse, do we have in-home prevention services that can address the abuse? We've got to be trauma informed. I was not a trauma informed social worker for a long time. And I made a lot of mistakes in my early career because I was not trauma informed. I didn't understand the neurobiology behind the trauma. I didn't understand physiologically what the body does when it's under that much stress and when it's that hypervigilant. I didn't understand why the medication didn't work. I didn't understand why the therapy didn't work. And so I made a lot of poor decisions and a lot of mistakes. And that's why I'm so passionate about teaching and training other people what to look for, how to build these relationships with these kids, because what research has told us is that one of the best things that these kids can have is a loving and supportive, unconditional, nurturing environment or person in their life. That heals trauma, but it has to be consistent and over time. It can't be somebody that's in their life for 6 months and is gone. That creates another abandonment issue. These are people who come into these kids' lives and stay in these kids' lives long term and love them unconditionally despite what they see, despite what they hear, despite what they do, which is what they should be getting in their own home, but they're not. And so, but it mitigates what's going on and helps them believe in themselves. It helps them feel safe, and it helps them feel loved, and it helps them feel like they belong. And you're helping provide those basic needs. That's how we get these kids to thrive. That's how we get them to get to that self-actualization. Trauma informed means that we are not making it worse. We are trying to prevent further harm. Being victim centered, we're putting that victim's needs above everything else. Definitely above our agendas. Blaming and shaming, we've got to cut that out for sure. Blaming the children for those behaviors that they cannot control. When your limbic system is in control, they cannot control those behaviors that come out. The violence, the dissociation, the running, that's coming from their limbic brain telling them, run, you've got to survive. If you stay here, you're going to die. That's literally what their brains are telling them. And so when we see that behavior, we often blame and shame and tell them to just be good. But it's a normal brain reaction to a threat. And we have to start seeing those behaviors as a reaction to a threat and realizing that our brain sees a bear coming at us and abandonment as the same type of threat. Your brain can't distinguish between the two. And so when a child feels abandoned or a child feels rejected, they might get angry and violent and disruptive. And so blaming and shaming them is all that's going to do is create this unsafe place. What these children have learned is unknown equals unsafe. So they have no control over their environments. They don't know what's going to happen next. That creates this unsafe feeling. So we've got to create spaces for them that are safe. We've got to meet their needs. If they're hungry, we need to meet that need. We need to get down on their level and not tower over them. We have to understand the neurobiology behind the trauma. We have to look at our body language and the language that we're using. We need to stop using the terms bad. We need to stop trying to blame and shame and instead say, tell me what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you. We have to make sure that the spaces that we provide them are comfortable and inviting and not threatening. Like, if you go into like a mental health clinic and it says rules, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, that can kind of create anxiety. We've got to look at our facial expressions and our body language. Are we presenting ourselves as somebody that is a safe person? That's how we're going to stop this ACEs to trafficking pipeline. We've got to become people that they feel safe with and they can trust. That means spending quality time. That means giving them some control and choices. That means meeting a need. Trust. Do what you say you're going to do. Don't make false promises. They can read through that. Affirmation. Affirm their feelings. Affirm what you see them say, hear, and do. That helps them know that you hear them and that you see their struggle. Their life is like living in a straitjacket. They have no control over anything in life. And so giving them some choices and control are very helpful. So,
Awesome. Holly, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead, if we can, just to stay on track. We're going to switch to some questions, Holly. We've already got several in the chat. And so this comes from Jody Palmer, and she would like to know, what are behavior interventions that do target the limbic system? And are interventions effective when they are still living in the trauma environment?
Yeah, interventions are still when they're in the trauma environment, and the that you're going to want to use are going to be word regulation. Good, but it targets prefrontal cortex. Some
Okay, well, we are going to get answers to those questions for you, Jody, and there's a few more, so we can definitely share Holly's contact information with you all, and that way you can get your questions answered. That was phenomenal information. I took several notes. One of the biggest takeaways I had from this is listen to the behaviors we're seeing. If we don't, traffickers will. And I think that's something that we can all take away from that training on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. I hope that was informative for you. I'm going to switch over to our partner, Stacey Kostavicki, with Gulf Coast Kids House. She's going to share a little bit more about some programs for children who are going through some similar things. Stacey?
Hey, thank you, Sarah. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. So I'm Stacy. I'm the director of Gulf Coast Kids House. We are your local child advocacy center. So the best way to summarize us up is that we combine all of the professionals and resources that are needed to investigate, treat, and prosecute child abuse cases in Escambia County. Now, that also includes child trafficking, which unfortunately we have seen an increase in during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sarah mentioned earlier, and Representative Salzman, about the training that we do in the schools for grade K through 12. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some training opportunities that are available for you and your children via Gulf Coast Kids House. So the program that we use in K through 12 is from the Monique Burr Foundation. It's called Child Safety Matters, and it really focuses on children's personal safety. It's done in a very approachable way. There are no scare tactics prevention shows that scare tactics are not successful in teaching. Unfortunately, 61% of our children are likely to become a victim of abuse before they're the age of 18. So it's very important to use this program, which is age and developmentally appropriate. It's fun and interactive. We talk about, again, the 5 safety rules, and these are rules that kids can take with them through their whole lives. First safety rule is know what's up. When we're talking with little children, that's knowing your parents' name, not just mom and dad, knowing their phone numbers, knowing your address. We also talk about spotting red flags, and we're pretty specific about adults should not be asking children for help. That's a big, big red flag. If a red flag happens, kids need to know how to make a move, which is to get away from that threat or stay away from the threat. And the next thing they need to do is talk it up. We teach kids to have 5 safe adults, 1 for every finger on your hand, and those people need to be within your home and out of your home. So when you face an unsafe situation, you're able to talk it up to one of your safe adults. And we tell kids sometimes adults are busy or they don't listen that well. So you've got to have 5 so that if 1 doesn't hear you or doesn't take action, you go on to your next safe adult. And then, as Holly referenced, the biggest one is no blame, no shame. There's never anything that children should be ashamed of. It's the use of force, coercion, and manipulation that adults use on our children. So if you want to go to the Monique Burr Foundation, they have a great website. They have programs not only for schools that we do in Escambia County, but educational resources for parents. They do after school education as well as athlete education. And lastly, you're seeing on your screen our No Child Abuse training. This was a program that we developed in order to try to maximize our impact on the community. It's online, it's free, it's at knowchildabuse.org, KNOW childabuse.org. And this program is appropriate for anyone 18 and older. It's even appropriate for some of our high school students. Again, no scare tactics. What we're talking about is how to recognize, reduce, and respond cases of child abuse and child trafficking. 30 minutes of your time. We would love to work with an organization to get the whole staff informed about child abuse and child trafficking prevention. Everything's free. We do have a team of prevention specialists here that would be happy to work with you to come out and do personal education, or again, just go online and do the knowchildabuse.org training. Also, just there are plenty of volunteer opportunities. We're grateful to partner with the NICI project for the first of many community educations.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Such a wonderful program you offer to our school children in our school district. And I know many who have taken those trainings and the no abuse trainings that have learned so much in just that short 30-minute period. And that's the awesome part. There's so many trainings out there that are offered that are couple hours, half a day, whole day sessions, and this is only 30 minutes. So y'all should go and definitely take that training. Up next is Trends in Trafficking with Corporal Alan Wilkett. Corporal Wilkett is recently retired from the Pasco Sheriff's Office, where he served for 15 years with a total law enforcement experience of over 25 years. Corporal Wilkett has devoted the past several years in the fight against human trafficking. He has trained and instructed law enforcement, federal agencies, state and local agencies, NGOs, along with multiple groups, churches, and organizations. The Pasco Human Trafficking Task Force, the Human Trafficking Commission, and Light Up the Night are founding initiatives. Corporal Wilkett was awarded the 2017 Florida Human Trafficking Law Enforcement Official of the Year from Attorney General Pam Bondi, and recently received the Law Enforcement Lifetime Achievement Award from the Florida Crime Prevention Association. He is a subject matter expert and was opening expert of a recent sex trafficking Netflix documentary, Blind Eyes Open. Corporal Wilkett is also joined by attorney Danny Pinter. Danny serves as senior legal counsel for NCOSE and its law center. In this role, she drafts and consults on state legislation to support victims of sexual exploitation and hold exploiters accountable. Danny also serves as a voice for human dignity in precedent-setting legal cases on behalf of victims of sexual abuse and exploitation. Danny speaks regularly on a variety of exploitation topics, with a special focus protecting youth in a digital age and on legal solutions to curb the demand for prostituted and sex trafficking individuals. This is going to be a fantastic presentation, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Corporal Alan Wilkett. Please help me welcome him.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that introduction. It sounded like I wrote it myself, so that's awesome. Thank you so much. It's just a pleasure to be here today. I'm flying a little bit blind on my screen since my screen has the entire presentation on it. So if there's a problem or something, somebody will have to do it by voice until I'm able to stop sharing the screen. But anyway, the point is that we are just delighted to be here to talk about baselines and trends. I'm so glad to have my dear friend Danny with me as well, and I'll be kicking this over to her for a case study and some work that they're doing at INCOSI, which is just an amazing organization that I've had the privilege to work with as well, and also with Bridging Freedom, who is a safe campus for minor sex trafficking females. Had the opportunity to work with them as well, and then of course, as you heard, retired from law enforcement after a little over 25 years, up to 27 years of law enforcement. So it's just a delight to be here. Since we're limited on time, and I want to get as much information to you as possible, including with Danny, I'm gonna kind of jump into what we came to talk about today, and that's kind of baselines and trends. And one of the things that I want to share with you is that, first of all, we have to recognize that when we talk about baselines, we have to kind of come to common consensus as to what human trafficking is. And I know you've already had a presentation on kind of human trafficking 101 and talking about the TVPA and how it framed up the legal framework on a federal level. And then, of course, the state of Florida comes along and really kind of mirrors that and then enhances some of the things that are happening. And we happen to have some great legislators who every year come back along and fight for enhanced penalties and looking at creative ways to bring more tools into our toolboxes to fight this. But when you look at human trafficking, kind of that baseline of what human trafficking is and what the TVPA, when it defined human trafficking, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, and now renewed several times since then. When you begin to look at human trafficking, I think probably one of the things that we have to really consider is what would be a street definition of human trafficking. And for those of us that work in this space and are passionate about ending human trafficking, we know that human trafficking, when you kind of reduce and take all the words out of it, that human trafficking is when one individual takes advantage of the vulnerabilities of another individual for a commercial purpose. And those two major forms that we fight here in the United States of labor trafficking and sex trafficking. And I'm going to be concentrating quite a bit today on sex trafficking and looking at some of the trends and emerging trends that we're seeing in the sex trafficking world. But we understand what human trafficking is and kind of that basic understanding of human trafficking. And then we look at the scope. How big is human trafficking? And again, we have statistics all over the place, and we have to kind of reference certain organizations. And one of the ones that I use is the ILO, the International Labor Organization, that determines that there are over 40 million victims of human trafficking globally, that it spans into every country, that it generates $150 billion a year. And most experts would say that that's the second largest criminal enterprise in the world, behind the drug trade. And having worked in both of those spaces and seen the harm and the trauma that happened in both the drug trade and certainly the human trafficking, and then to hear that so many are now predicting that at some point in time, 5, 6, 10 years from now, that human trafficking could very well become the #1 criminal enterprise in the world because of that basic premise that a human being can be sold and is sold over and over and over and over and over and over again. The product that just keeps being put back on the market. And so we see that. We see the enormity of this. And then we have to look at when human trafficking, and you see on your screen now that I kind of brought up a map that's represented in the TIP report, which of course is a report that's produced by the State Department every year. And they look at kind of emerging trends and what they're seeing globally as well as in country. And it's an amazing report. And sometimes it's difficult reading, but it's an amazing report. And they produced this map that really shows compliance in countries around the world, or lack of compliance. And as you see, as we kind of bring up some of the other tier 1 countries, those countries that are in green, then you have the tier 2 countries, which are kind of in that orange shade that you see on your screen. And you can see the list of there, that countries that are implementing methods to combat human trafficking, but maybe have not fully got engaged. And so you see, then you see those countries in red, which are tier 3 countries that, and I'm not going to be politically correct today, and I apologize ahead of that. You're probably going to hear the old street cop come out at me from time to time, and I apologize if I get a little blunt here and there. But these are countries that are just not doing anything to stop human trafficking. They are, in many cases, supply countries. They're supplying victims up on the global market. And we see that in the Soviet Union, or the old Soviet Union, and Russia, and Ukraine, and so on and so forth. China, you see represented here, countries that are not making significant efforts to combat human trafficking. What I find amazing about this is back in the day, for those of you that have been engaged in this for a while, we used to show supply and demand on a global market. And it's interesting because those countries in red from the TIP report are reflected in red in that old map that we used to use on global supply and demand. But what I found significant about this report, and what I found to be almost a subtle shift in the way we look at this, is that the TIP report made this very clear, that a majority of victims are being trafficked in the country of origin, which means that they are being lured in, whether it be sex trafficking or labor trafficking. They're being trafficked in, brought into the business or into the game, and then they're being exploited within the country of their own origin. I found that to be kind of almost a fascinating shift, because we've oftentimes looked at global supply and demand, and it's there, it's still there, but also to recognize that most victims, or many victims, are actually being trafficked within the country of their origin. I found that to be kind of a fascinating statement to be made, and certainly true in my experience. The experience that I've had in the law enforcement sector is that most of the victims that we recover are certainly our locals, they're certainly our citizens. We do find those that come from other countries, but a significant portion of them are being trafficked within the country of their own origin, which is the United States of America. What I presented here is that human trafficking triangle. And the reason I want to take a moment and spend here is because I want to kind of create a baseline for some of the trending that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. And what I like about this is that this theory of the human trafficking triangle basically says that in order to have trafficking take place, you need 3 actors or 3 players. There's a victim, there's a trafficker, and then there's a buyer. There's a couple things that come out of that theory. And the first thing is that if we're going to collapse the triangle, the theory behind this is that if you could collapse one side of the triangle, you could collapse the entire triangle, or collapse human trafficking. And a simple way of looking at that is that if we had the ability today, all of us on this call, and those that are listening, or those that are working, if we had the ability to go recover every victim today out of human trafficking, that because you've taken this side of the equation, or this side of the triangle, you could collapse the triangle of human trafficking. If we could go arrest every trafficker today, or take every trafficker out of the business. What I find fascinating about this is that oftentimes we talk in terms in the human trafficking space, the anti-human trafficking space. We talk oftentimes about victim services, and we should. We talk about strengthening laws and holding accountable the trafficker, and we should. Enhancing penalties, and we should. But I've oftentimes been a little miffed by the lack of attention that sometimes is given to the buyer. In my view, and I'm going to stress that, in my view, don't hold this to anyone else, but in my view, the buyer should be held equally culpable for the trauma that's being forced on that victim the buyer should be held equally culpable as the trafficker. I believe the buyer who creates the demand side of this, the buyer who is intent on putting the money into the equation of this business of human trafficking, the buyer who is creating the market needs to be held accountable for the trauma that they're inflicting on the victim. So it always has amazed me in my work, in my past life, in my active life. It's always amazed me at how little the buyer is oftentimes held accountable and excused. Their behavior is oftentimes excused. That it's the oldest activity in the world. It's the good old boys. It's to get all that stuff is absolutely it's wrong, and almost slipped into cop talk. It's wrong. We need to hold that buyer accountable for the trauma. So when you look at the triangle, and I know there's other things, in fact, and Danny will come along in just a minute and talk about something that is very important to me, and I think will be equally as important to you, is that holding that trafficker. And that oftentimes, if you can't identify a trafficker, particularly in minor sex trafficking, is that sometimes they'll say, well, there really is no trafficker, so the triangle must be. I will hold that sometimes big tech takes on the role of trafficker. I think, and this is just me again talking to you, but I think that dating websites who advertise minors for sale and for sex trafficking should be held as a trafficker. I think that culpability of facilitating the sale between a buyer and a victim is that trafficker role. And isn't it amazing that sometimes that buyer or that trafficker may actually be a tech platform or a dating website or a Craigslist listing or whatever that may be. So I think sometimes we have to think beyond that traditional role of what a pimp is and who's really pimping out the victim. And I sometimes hate to use that term, but just to put in those terms. There are 4 stages of human trafficking. There's recruiting, grooming, trafficking, and immersion. You see them on your screen. Recruiting, and I'm going to go through these very quickly because this, again, is just basic information. But again, to set a baseline for the emerging trends. Recruiting, in this stage of recruiting, this is when the vulnerabilities of that potential victim are being assessed. They begin to ask questions or assess financial, emotional, relational needs are being identified by the recruiter. And the exploitation begins in that recruiting stage. And I'm going to make a statement here in a minute that's not popular. And so, again, just hold me responsible for that. Then the grooming stage, which we talk about often, is the conditioning stage. It's where the victim is being conditioned for the life they're about to enter into. And that can be very slowly, or it can be fairly rapid as well. And I have seen both of those, that grooming that has taken weeks or months, and then grooming that can happen within hours or minutes even. Trafficking, this is a stage where the money's being made. This is where the sale is being made. And then immersion is kind of an interesting legal space. Immersion is a stage where the victim has been involved in the life long enough that oftentimes they become part of the criminal enterprise. Oftentimes in a stable, they might be referred to as the bottom, the bottom bitch. So, and I use that term in their language. The bottom is oftentimes somebody that's been in the life long enough that they become part of that criminal enterprise. They may do some scheduling. They may do even some of the discipline within the stable, which can include battery. They may help with the facilitating of the sale. Or set up other criminal enterprises as well, including the muling of drugs or shoplifting or any of those masking crimes that we talk about. That presents an interesting dilemma in the legal side, because it's, do you treat them now still as a victim, or are they now part of that criminal enterprise and should be held as part of that racket or racketeering? So that's an interesting dilemma. Now, let me make a statement about these 4 stages, and then I'll move on. I personally believe that recruiting and grooming is still part of the trafficking scheme. So I would like to see a real effort to include recruiting and grooming in the trafficking scheme so that they could be pursued criminally as well. So a lot of times people will hide behind, legal principles or precedents and say you can't do that. I think recruiting and grooming should be part of that trafficking scheme and part of the crime of trafficking as well. When we talk about especially children, and we talk about the trafficker potentially being part of ESPs or electronic platforms, this I found to be an interesting report, an interesting thing that came out of NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. NCMEC has a cyber tip line, and in that cyber tip line, ESPs or electronic service providers are required to report CSAM, child sexual abuse material. They're required to report that when it comes across their platform. So they create the algorithms, the filters, when they see a potential or suspected CSAM, they're supposed to report that to the cyber tip line. In 2020, last year, there were over 21 million reports of CSAM to the cyber tip line. Now, I don't know if that number hits you like it did me when I saw that. And perhaps in my latter part of my life after retiring, maybe I'm getting more sentimental, but I was stunned by that, because what that 21.7 million reports can look like black letters on a white background, but in truth, those numbers, each one of those is wrapped in human flesh. That is a child who is potentially being exploited on a digital platform, because 21.4 million of that came from ESP providers. And as you see there on the reports, Facebook had over 20 million. And my first instinct is to say, oh my goodness, how bad can Facebook possibly? But at least they're reporting this. Over 20 million apparent reports of apparent CSAM that they reported to the cyber tip line. But I also look at those that you see under there, Google, Snapchat, TikTok, and there are over 100 of these ESPs that report into that cyber tip line. And my question is that really you're looking at numbers from, say, Twitter or TikTok, and those numbers being so small as compared to a Facebook or even Google that you see there. And my question then simply becomes this: why does it appear that there's such underreporting? I think it's time for us in this space to say to these ESPs, and I wrote about this just the other day and did a news interview regarding this. And one of the statements that I made in regards to that was the protection of our children should be a priority. It should be what we default to. And we need to hold them accountable. And again, I'm going to make the statement from me, not from anyone else, that in my view, if they are complicit, then they are holding the role of a trafficker. They are facilitating the exploitation. There were two studies that were done in 2018 that was looking at the cyber tip line and these CSAM that was being reported. And here were the key findings. And I want to take the moment, and I know we're going to be running out of time here in just a moment, but I wanted to take the moment to mention this, that girls appear in the overwhelming majority of CSAM. That probably is not something that surprises you. Prepubescent children are at the greatest risk to be depicted in CSAM. And when boys are victimized, they're more likely to be subjected to very explicit or egregious abuse. On an average, the boys are younger than the girls, and 78% of the reports of online enticement involve girls, 15% involve boys. And I just wanted you to kind of grasp for just this moment some of those key findings that came from those two studies regarding these reports that are coming into the cyber tip line. So when we're looking at CSAM and we're looking at enticement, we're looking at the exploitation of vulnerability, particularly of our kids, there are three digital gateways. And here's where I'm going to start that, looking at where the trendings are starting to happen. Those three digital gateways are going to be social media, it's going to be apps, and it's going to be gaming systems. And the reason why I think this is so important to take a moment to look at these is because, as you're going to see in the case study, some work that has to do in this digital world, it's also important to note that many statistics are now coming out about 60% or more of trafficking, particularly sex trafficking, is happening online. I want to capture 60%. I personally think that that number is low. I think it's much higher than 60%, especially when you look at lockdowns and when you look at the pandemic and you look at how much time our kids are spending online. That 60% is probably a very low number, but some of the statistics are showing 60%. Now that means in all the phases that we just talked about, the top three phases of human trafficking: recruiting, grooming, and trafficking happening online. And it's happening through these digital gateways, social media. Let's look at social media for just a moment. Social media comes in three types. There's synchronous, asynchronous, and no synchronous. And I know those are kind of terms that are used, but every social media platform falls into one of these categories. The synchronous are going to be social media platforms that you have to have mutual agreement in order to see each other's information. It's generally considered to be the safest of the platforms, but only when it's used responsibly. Because I now, and I know this is kind of an interpretive word, but I kind of know who it is that I'm in agreements with. We've had a friend request, and I've said yes to you, and you've said yes to me. And two of those that are kind of the big ones on the block are going to be Facebook, obviously, and then LinkedIn. So those are synchronous. You're in synchrony with one another in order to share information back and forth. The other is asynchronous. Asynchronous social media platforms are basically follower type platforms. They're going to be where you can find somebody interesting that you want to follow, their content you find to be interesting, and that you basically just follow them. There's really no necessarily agreement. You're not really sharing information back and forth. You're choosing to follow someone and be able to see. They can be locked down, but only about 12% are private. The rest are really public. The two big ones in this space are going to be Twitter and Instagram, but there are many others as well. And that's an asynchronous media platform. The last one is a no synchronous. And a no synchronous is typically regarded to be the most dangerous of them because it's completely anonymous. They're known as wall platforms where you can just anonymously get on somebody's wall and you can post or write something on the wall. They're typically anonymous, and it allows the writer, the one who's posting to the wall platform, to feel secure in basically saying what they want to without consequence. A lot of cyberbullying happens here, but we're also starting to see this being used and utilized in some of the trafficking, especially to set up an additional messaging platform. So you can see those, and those Yik Yak and Ask.fm are the two big ones out there, but there are many of these that are out there as well. They're very, very high cyberbullying in particular, but also in sexting and also with sextortion can also be involved in these platforms as well. The apps, and I just put this on the screen just as an example. In 2019, I had put 21 apps, or we put together 21 apps and posted it to the Pasco Sheriff's Office website. And I think there's still one there now. I don't know if it's 21 apps and it's been revised. It should be by now because they change so quickly. And I worked with Hernando's CAC, their Child Advocacy Center, and we kind of revised that a little bit from 2019 list and put together these 21 apps. And I want to caution you when you see this that these are just representations. There are many out there. But I think in this representation, it's good to kind of take a look at this and to look at this and say, okay, here's a representation of kind of what's out there. And you'll recognize many of these that are on the screen. But a couple that I'll point out to before we move on is I'll point out things like WhatsApp. And you see the WhatsApp there. WhatsApp is a encrypted messaging system where the message is encrypted from end user to receiver. And I'm telling you, the encryption is very secure and these very difficult for an outside. And in fact, I will tell you that I don't know of any, unless you get into maybe some of the federal systems on local and state levels, I don't know of any agencies that are able to kind of break those encryptions. They are very, very strong, military grade in many cases. So WhatsApp. Back in the day, Kik was really big. That's kind of fallen out of favor. It's in and out. WhatsApp was big for a long time among our kids, but now parents really know about WhatsApp, so it's kind of fallen out of favor with the kids. So what we're seeing, kind of and we're talking about emerging now, but we're seeing things like Wicker Me are going to be big. The big one that I'm seeing right now in the reports that I'm seeing among NGOs and law enforcement is Signal. Signal is big. Telegram is big, but Signal seems to be one that is being gravitated to. Again, a strong messaging system that has encryption at the basis of it. The other thing that I would point out here is you'll see like Yik Yak is on here. You see some of the video. Burn Book is another big one, and Burn Note. Both of those are big. You see TikTok on here, and you know the dangers that can be associated with that. But the one that I want to kind of end this little segment with is the calculator app, and you see that on your screen. That calculator app, that calculator adds, subtracts, looks just like your iPhone calculator that you have on your iPhone. It operates exactly like a calculator, finds the square root. You can do multiplication, division. But if you put a certain number sequence in there, it rolls over and it's a vault. And in that vault can be pornography. It can be contacts that they don't want anybody to know or their parents not to know or adults to know. It can have text messaging in there that maybe is sexting that they want to keep out of the public eye. And when mom or dad come into the room and they see mom and dad starting toward them, they can swipe up with their hand. It rolls over and it becomes a calculator again. It's a vault app. Have a lot of parents that'll ask me, say, "Oh, that surely there's no company that'll develop something like that." And of course, we would kind of laugh about that because we've seen these things. But I always encourage them, go to your app store and just type Vault app, and you'll see not only calculators, but photo albums and so on and so forth. My point being this, is that while I don't want you to really focus in on just these 21 apps, realize these are representation of what's out there and a recruiting tool. Because oftentimes if they meet a child, a predator, a potential trafficker meets a child on a social media platform or on a gaming system platform, they will encourage them to go to one of these, download this onto their phone, and then start the messaging and the recruiting and the grooming process right here from these messaging apps. So I just wanted you to have an idea of just a representation of what that could look like. Gaming systems. And I'm going to, here in just a moment, I'm going to pause and turn this over to Danny so that Danny can do the case study and talk to you a little bit about the great work they're doing. But right before I do that, gaming systems. I will tell you that gaming systems, whether it's Xbox One, whether it's PlayStation, whatever platform that gaming, if it has a chat or a messaging feature within the game, it is absolutely ripe to start exploiting vulnerabilities within our kids. Why do I say that? Because my own son an attempt was made to recruit him on a gaming system, an Xbox One. Had a messaging system, and he thought he was talking to another kid, and come to find out it was not a kid at all. I happened to be able to see that, and of course this has been a few years ago now when my son was younger, but was able to see that and recognize immediately the language was not language of another 13 or 14-year-old. And so that process obviously ended then. But the point that I'm making is that it's there. You have gaming concerns, you have the violence, the sexual content that's on there. You have predators that are, why would predators be on there? I get this question all the time. And while it makes common sense to many of us that work in this space, understand this, that back in the day, and I say early in my career, we used to do stranger danger talks to our kids. It was always about, be careful at playgrounds and parks and things of that nature. Because that's where the kids were, and that's where predators are. Where are kids now? They're online. So that's where the predators are. I want to, this last slide, and then it'll move over to Danny to talk to you a little bit more about these social media platforms and platforms that are out there. But I put on this screen, I kind of inserted this more toward the last minute because I just wanted to share something with you when we talk about the gaming systems. And by the way, it's one of the fastest growing tools in recruiting right now is in the gaming systems. And again, most people are shocked by that. I pulled this right out of Screen Rant, and it talks about the top best-selling video games of all time. You see Tetris is number one, Minecraft is number two. Now, what's interesting about this is that Tetris and Minecraft are not just standalone games, but they're bundled with other games, which is why they're at 1 and 2. Number 3, which is the best-selling video game of all time, is actually the best video game of all times as a standalone. Again, Tetris and Minecraft are bundled with others, and so therefore they're ranked number 1 and number 2. But number 3, Grand Theft Auto 5, GTA 5. Why do I pause for a moment just to talk about GTA 5? Well, two things. Number one, it was created in 2013. You would think that some of the later renditions would be much more sought after than GTA 5. Why GTA 5? Well, first of all, GTA 5 has some missions within it. For those of you that know gaming, GTA 5 has some missions within it that are just absolutely mind-boggling. First of all, you kill cops, you shoot people in the head. It's pretty graphic, so immediately there's a violent component to it. In my view, there's an anti-cop slant in GTA 5 as well. But it also has missions in it where you can pull up in your vehicle, you can negotiate with a prostituted person that's on the sidewalk and can agree to, hey, do you want to date? Here's a female gets into the vehicle. She performs a sexual act on you, and you can actually see her head moving in that sexual manner. You can see that sexual act certainly being implied right here on a game that millions of our kids are playing. Millions of our kids are playing. She can get out of the vehicle, you shoot her in the head, you get your money. There's just some incredibly violent things within there that also has this trafficking component within GTA 5. It amazes me that when you look at these games that are there, that has these components within them, and you recognize that it is the number one standalone game, according to Screen Rant, third all time. Why would it be GTA 5? There's better graphics than some of the later ones. Because most psychologists, when they look at this, they will tell you that GTA 5, for the first time, you were in the first person when this was happening. It allows our kids to actually be involved in the act that's on that screen. It was, for the first time, a first-person act. So now it's not just a sexual act being done to somebody. It's a sexual act being done to me while you're playing the game. So I mentioned that to you just again to recognize this is the number one fastest growing area that we're seeing right now is in this video game out of these digital platforms. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Danny now. Danny's going to take it through. And Danny, you'll just have to let me know when you want me to move the slide. But this is Danny Pinner. She is a dear friend of mine, a great friend of mine, who also serves on a board with me. She's fantastic. I'm going to send this over to her, and I'm going to bring up that first screen for you. Hi, Danny. It's good to have you here.
Great to see you. Thank you so much. So my name is Danny Pinter. I'm Senior Legal Counsel at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation Law Center. We call ourselves NCOSE for short. Just, for those of you who have never heard of NCOSE, we are a nonprofit organization based in DC, and our key mission is to connect the web of sexual exploitation. So we raise awareness and educate the public as to how all these different forms of sexual exploitation, from prostitution, sex trafficking, childhood sexual abuse, pornography, are really all connected and related to one another. And within our nonprofit, we also have a law center, and that's where I work. And in our law center, we work on policy issues, but also litigation on behalf of sexual abuse and sex trafficking victims. And so this is where I'm going to share a case study related to what Alan was describing for you today. So in one of our cases, it's Doe v. Twitter, and it's a case in federal court in California. I'm going to tell the story of our clients so that you can see how this trend of sex trafficking occurring online, how that really plays out in reality. So our clients are two young men. They were 13 years old when they were contacted on Snapchat. So Alan mentioned something called sextortion, and that's what's at the heart of our case. So our client, he was 13. He was on Snapchat when he received a nude picture from a girl who said she was a 16-year-old at the high school down his street. And I mean, she knew the name of the high school and his community. And so of course he believed it was a peer, and he's only 13. And she said, sent him this nude pic and said, if you send me some of you, I'll send you more, that kind of thing. And let's be honest, what 13-year-old boy isn't going to fall for that scheme? And what's alarming is we know that trafficking victims are often particularly vulnerable from particularly vulnerable populations, but our client was not. He was in a very stable, intact, affluent home with no other vulnerabilities except being a child, because that is a vulnerability, right? He's just a young teenage child. And so that was the vulnerability that was exploited. And that's what, why we need to be aware of this, because all 13-year-old children are vulnerable in the same way. So, he engaged with the person on the other end who turned out not to be a peer. And when this trafficker started asking for more extreme content, and he said no, what did they do? They sextorted him. And what that means is they said, well, we have these pictures of you already, and if you don't send us more, we're going to send them to your mom, we're going to send them to your baseball coach, your pastor. And they showed him that they had found him on Facebook. They knew who his baseball coach was, they knew who his pastor was. And so he felt, of course, humiliated and shamed and extorted into producing more. So he ended up producing, some more extreme content. These two boys did, who were wrapped up in this scheme. And eventually they, just shut off contact with the trafficker, deleted the app. Nothing happened. So they thought, they were in the clear. And then a couple years go by and they're in high school. And all of a sudden, the videos and images that they had created were compiled into a video and were being shared on Twitter. So it was going viral on Twitter, and everyone in their high school had seen these videos, were harassing and bullying them. Our client, luckily his mom found out because another child's mom called her and said, my son told me that your son's contemplating suicide. I don't know what's going on, but I just had to let you know, check in with him. And thank goodness that happened. And like I said, luckily he did have, an active, involved, loving mom and dad. And so they talked to him and found out what had been going on, and came around him, were totally supportive, of course, but it is hard, right, for a teenager to talk to their parents about something like that. And but luckily they filled her in. And so, she's talking to him, about what's going on here on Twitter, whatever. And he's like, yeah, so it's all over Twitter. I commented that I was a minor on the video, and I reported it, and I haven't, I got no response, basically. And she's like, well, report it again and I'll report it too. So this is where we get to the place that we believe Twitter stepped in the role of the sex trafficker, at the very least, was benefiting from this original trafficking scheme. So this material had been gone viral around Twitter in just a couple days. It had reached over 167,000 views and 2,200 retweets. So the way that we know that these platforms operate is by collecting user data, right, and advertising to advertisers. So the more a piece of content gets attention and gets engagement, the more valuable it is. So we can just see on the face that with 167,000 views and 2,200 retweets, that's substantial engagement, and that this was generating a profit for Twitter. But, did they know what was going on? Maybe, we believe that they had a responsibility to do more, because what most people don't understand about Twitter is they fully allow hardcore pornography on their website. So unlike Facebook and Instagram, which at least on their face have a policy that does not allow sexually explicit content. It might slip through. They might not be as tough on it as we want them to, but they don't actually openly allow it or embrace it. And Twitter does. So Twitter says we allow hardcore pornography on our site. We don't, it's not a violation of our policies. And as a result of that, what a lot of people don't realize is there's anything you would want to see on Pornhub or X videos or the big porn sites is on Twitter. Those porn sites have Twitter accounts that they share content, and there's an entire culture of users that are sharing really hardcore videos on there. There's absolutely no limit. Like, it's as hardcore as you would find on any website. I would say the only difference is Twitter has a limit to the video length. So they're all, 2.5 minutes or whatever that would be of clips. But to be honest, that's the trend in pornography right now, are these shorter clips, because people are just moving from clip to clip and that sort of thing. So that's key here, because Twitter does nothing to verify the age of this pornography they allow on their site and make sure that it's adults and not children, because if it's children, that's CSAM, that's child pornography, a major federal crime. They do nothing to check on that, and they do nothing to prevent children from viewing this content. So so already they've opened the door to our client being exploited by traffickers who gravitate to the site as a way to share CSAM massively on a massive scale on Twitter, right? Huge audience there. And we'll get into sort of that in the next slide. But what's important is the clients put Twitter on notice. They said, he reported and his mother reported. They never responded to the mother at all. Even though this was a minor using their software, they ignored the parent involved. Upon his second report, they did respond to the child. They took their time, and what they said was, which is very alarming, is they said, you need to prove that this is you. You need to send us some ID. Okay, first of all, they left the content live during this investigation period. So rather than suspending the content and asking for that follow-up, because then they could restore it, they left it live. So while he's submitting his government issue ID, which luckily he had, because now he was 16 and had this, but had he still been 13, what identification could he have provided them? So an even younger child actually couldn't prove that they were the child depicted in the video. Problematic. Luckily, he did have this ID. So he submits it and said, you can see my face. This is me. I'm a minor now, and I was even younger then. We're both minors in the videos. Like, please remove this content. And that Twitter responded with, we've removed the material and found it does not violate our terms, and so we're taking no action. They left CSAM live to continue being distributed on their site. So our client's abuse continued to be distributed, and he and his mother felt completely at a loss. It remained on Twitter for another 9 days. Luckily, through a family connection, they got, Department of Homeland Security involved, who issued a formal takedown, and then it came down. But not before that. And so that's why we're filing a civil lawsuit on their behalf against Twitter, alleging that they knowingly benefited from trafficking. They knew this was sex trafficking material. They knew they were making a profit of it, and they continued to do that. Luckily, we got past the motion to dismiss, which is a huge victory. I put CDA 230 immunity at the bottom because although it's been a hot topic, I think a lot of people don't understand it. But the reason that big tech has become so complicit in this activity is because they have been given immunity by the courts. So there's this statute in place that essentially says that websites aren't responsible for what third parties post on their platforms. And that's what Twitter tried to say to us, that we're not responsible for the fact that this child's child pornography is on our site because we didn't post it, someone else did. Which is just appalling, really, really appalling. And that's why it was so important that FOSTA SESTA was passed in 2018, which says that despite this immunity that might exist, it doesn't apply to sex trafficking. When you knowingly sex traffic or benefit from sex trafficking, you will be held accountable. And so this is kind of one of those first breakthrough victories using FOSTA SESTA, where the court did say, yeah, you knew you were benefiting from sex trafficking, you do not get to claim this immunity. And so that case, still has a long way to go, but obviously, we're really hopeful because of that. But it's a really scary story because our client's story is not does not operate in a vacuum and is happening all the time. And the fact that Twitter so arrogantly felt that they had this immunity and continued to behave the way they did, the fact that they left it up is because big tech has become they believe they're all powerful. They've gotten to the point where this exploitation is rampant on all of these platforms and they don't feel they need to do anything. And that's where we need to come in and show them that, yes, they do need to do something and recognize all of the harm that's happening to our children online. And so I'm going to give you an example of the scale. Thank you, Alan. This next slide. So you may not be able to see, if you can go to this, slide right before with the screenshots, slide 13. You may not be able to see all of this. I will try and point some of the things out. But what I have here are screenshots from Twitter. And what I did was I searched hashtag megalinks. And I'll just give a warning to anyone, don't search that hashtag unless you have your sensitive content filter on, meaning that you can't see explicit content. It'll filter it out if you choose that setting, because if you do this hashtag megalinks, porn will come up. So I just don't want you to see that accidentally, especially since we don't know if they're all adults, right? Particularly because what I'm about to talk to you about. So Megalinks is an encrypted cloud software. It's like Dropbox, but it's very popular for criminal activity because, like I said, not only is it encrypted, but they sort of facilitate this ultra privacy / not open to law enforcement investigation on their site. And so what it's been used for is the mass distribution of child pornography. So right here on Twitter, anyone can do this. Anyone can search it. I search it every day and I still see it. I put this hashtag in our complaint thinking that when I publicly address this in a federal case, Twitter would block the hashtag surely. They did not. It's still going and it still happens every day. And what this is open solicitation for child pornography on Twitter. So what you will see here is people blatantly asking for child pornography. I'll read some of the things that they're saying. So here, send megalinks age 10 to 16. Just explicitly asking for minor children links of CSAM videos of them. Looking for kids. Incest. Some of them say, and here, when I typed hashtag megalinks, Twitter proffered some helpful suggestions like young, megalinks young. Their algorithm actually paired the word young with megalinks because that's what it's used for. It's most often used by users looking for young content. And so their algorithm is doing this, and yet they still are not blocking this material. You'll see here, and someone is saying they're a seller of rape, incest. Another one says young. They use the word jailbait to say that it's a child. I looked this up, and here we have at the very bottom, have mainly PC inverted, meaning CP child porn. I have done this search once a week, including this week, and I almost always see an age range. I think there's only been one time where I haven't seen a specific age range. I just point that out to say that there is no ambiguity. This is clearly child porn and what is being asked for and being traded and being offered. And what's also alarming is there's always Twitter users adding Twitter, tagging Twitter and tagging Jack Dorsey before he left, or tagging Twitter support saying, hey, Twitter, why are you allowing this hashtag that's spreading child pornography? But Twitter continues to let this hashtag go. And the reason that that's significant is they block other hashtags. They block the Save the Children hashtag, which, I'm not making a statement whether I was right or wrong. I think there were problematic things with them. So they blocked it. Well, this couldn't be more blatantly problematic, and I see no benefit. It is used almost exclusively for the trading of child pornography, and they will not block it because there is a lot of activity here. This is a niche market on their site. You can go to the next slide, Alan, and I will wrap it up. But I just wanted to illustrate to you how significant the problem is, and that these big tech platforms are just not doing enough. And in some cases, it seems that they are facilitating and knowingly profiting from the exploitation of children on their sites. And then I just point to a couple of other cases we have really quickly. We have 2 class action cases against internet tube pornography sites. So I say tube sites because they're like YouTube, in the sense that the way the platform is set up is anybody could upload videos, right? It's just tons and tons of videos. They upload some themselves and create some themselves, but a lot of it is like user generated. And so that's what they hid behind, was that we have immunity because these are user generated, even though they're inviting hardcore pornographic content and doing absolutely no age verification at all. Anyone could anonymously upload a video. Within seconds, it would be live. Of course, they're guaranteeing a segment of that content would be children exploited, and it was. And many, many times over it was. You can see there's 2 New York Times articles highlighting those websites. And so we have brought class action lawsuits on behalf of minors exploited on those tube sites. And you can go to our website to learn more about those stories, because they're just a little bit different of a form of this online sex trafficking. But I wanted to draw your attention to it, because more and more, as Alan sort of illustrated, traffickers, even those criminals who used to traffic drugs, they recognize that trafficking humans is even better gig, right? Because they can sell one woman over and over and over again, whereas like 1 kilo of cocaine can only be sold once. Well, similarly, they're recognizing not only can I sell this woman 10 times in person, but if I record it, then I can sell that recording hundreds of thousands, millions of times online. And that's what we're seeing. So I will kick it back to Alan, but please check out our website if you want to learn more, or if you know of anyone that this has happened to. We would love to help you, and also talk to you about if bringing a lawsuit against these platforms is right for you and might help you, and it certainly will hold these exploiters accountable. So thank you.
Thank you, Danny, for sharing that. And Alan, thank you as well for the plethora of information you shared with us today. I know I took some
take our questions, and we're going to wrap up our part of this. And again, thank you for having us. But I wanted to kind of talk about some of the emerging things. One of those is the language of trafficking. And again, Danny just talked about this and the work that NCOSI is doing. And yes, go to their website, check out the work they're doing. It's fantastic. But what we've recognized is that human trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking is really a culture. And in order to have a culture, you have to have 5 characteristics. And 2 of those is language, and you have symbols. And I'm going to talk how this is emerging. One is the language of trafficking. And I put up on the screen only about 20 different words that are used, and they're used in the sex trafficking. And you can see them on the screen. And I know it's really small, but I was trying to put as many on there as I possibly could. But just to kind of tell you where this is at, over my years of working in this space, which is multiple years of working in the human trafficking space, I have accumulated a glossary of terms that now exceeds 240 words. So I'm showing you an illustration on the screen of maybe 15 or 20 of those words, but I have a glossary of over 240 words that are used in the trafficking world, that language that's evolved through that. I was speaking to, and I'm going to try not to use too many illustrations, but I was speaking to a victim of human trafficking that was in a domestic violence shelter, and she was sitting across the table. She was only 19 years of age. She had a 2-year-old son who came in while we were talking and saw me in uniform and immediately ran to her and put his arms around her leg and said, "Please don't let him take you away." And my heart broke. I have to tell you that my heart broke in half. Seeing that little boy with his messed up hair and finger paint on his belly, so scared that I was going to take her away. And I thought, what kind of life has he experienced in this world? It affects so many people, the trauma. And I was broken, but I'll never forget when she looked at me and she made this statement, and this is one of many, but she said, talking about her pimp, she said, "Yeah, that square just wants bread." And had I not known, and you don't have to know every 240 words or 250 words, but had I not known that there was a language that's embedded there, I could have missed some really key things that she was trying to tell me. This is kind of a representation of what that language. But the new way of communicating is beginning to move to emojis. And you're seeing this in the advertisement, as Danny was talking about some of the big tech advertisements when they're advertising kids. You'll see some of these emojis. And I put, again, just a representation of what this is emerging as kind of the new communication. And I put, again, just a representation, but they'll take the emojis and they'll start using it in sentences. And again, I put some sentences of emojis there that talk about that new communication or that new way of communicating that we're seeing. And this is really being enhanced. Hashtags is another one, and I didn't have a chance to put some hashtags, but Danny referenced that as well. Some of this new communication in that emoji side. The other thing is the symbols. You all know about branding, and I'm not going to spend a long time here. I can tell you that for the first time in my career, working down in Miami around the Miami Super Bowl, which is about a year and a half ago now, almost 2 years ago, that I saw for the first time a QR code that was being used, and an NGO had come across this lady out of Indianapolis, and she had a QR code that was branded on her thigh that, according to her, would take you to a secure website to pay for her services. So you're seeing kind of even the evolving in this branding. And the old traditional branding is a tattoo that has that significance to the pimp, whether it be a symbol or numbers or a name. And you can see a representation. This, again, is a representation. That's kind of the old branding. We're seeing white branding now as well as the old traditional branding. But here's the emerging tool, is soft branding. So soft branding is not necessarily putting a tattoo on someone, which has more permanency, but it's becoming more common, particularly with minors who are being trafficked or recruited or groomed. They oftentimes will use soft branding. And again, you see the representation. It's going to be a bracelet or a necklace or an ankle bracelet. It'll have a charm. It'll have a symbol that, again, connects them back to their pimp, their trafficker, who oftentimes are identifying as their boyfriend. But they'll have an unusual attachment to it. They'll take showers with it on. They rarely will take it off. They become almost violent if you try to remove them from that branding. So that's kind of that emerging thing that we're seeing out of the old way of branding, which is still there, but now we're starting to see a soft branding that's emerging as well. And I wanted you to know that. The other thing is numbers that will be incorporated, whether it be a hard brand or a soft brand. There were numbers. 16 is very prevalent. P is the 16th letter of the alphabet. So that means I'm being pimped. So that 16, sometimes in Roman numerals, XVI. The other is going to be 304. 304 upside down is ho. So you may have the lion's head that you see here on your screen, and embedded maybe in the, which I saw one time was in the forehead of the lion, was 304. And so, and his street name was Leo. So that's Leo's ho in that symbol itself. So that's what we would refer to as a soft brand as opposed to a hard brand. I'm going to wrap up there. For any questions that you may have, I'm just going to throw on the screen some numbers, and you're already familiar with these numbers by and large, but here are some numbers for best practices for reporting. I'm going to just leave it there for just 1 second as I get ready to turn it over to our facilitators. But here's some numbers, again, known to you, but maybe one or two that maybe you've not seen. So I just wanted to kind of put that up there on the screen, and I'm getting ready to come off of screen share so that I can actually see you here for the questions that Danny and I will take. And so I'm getting ready to end this, but thank you so much, and we're here for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Danny. That was phenomenal information. I don't know how much of what I said earlier got on there, but just so much information that is super insightful and helpful for us as we try to advocate for victims here in our community. And so we're just, there's just so much that we could ask and go into here. And for the sake of time, we won't go over all the questions, but Alan, we do have a lot of people asking if we can share this information, your presentation somehow, and if that's okay with you, we can certainly email it to our participants after following the event.
Sure, I would be happy, and of course Danny can speak to the 3 slides that she had in there, but I'm more than happy to put it down on a PDF and send it to you. And if you want to distribute it through a PDF, that'd be great.
Perfect. And then one of the questions we had was back to the gaming system, and I think you can see it up there on the screen right now. Someone is asking if games are considered social, where predators can communicate with the child while gaming with them, and if it's private.
It is social because they can communicate. So a lot of the games will have a chat feature in them. So you'll see the kids with their headphones on with the little microphone across their mouth, and it may be something as innocent as a racing game. But you'll see the predator jump on there and masquerade, even with voice masking technology, which is so good now. They'll come across as maybe a 14-year-old girl or a 12-year-old girl. They'll establish a little bit of a relationship, and then they'll ask the person that they're recruiting, they'll ask them to go onto like Wicker or to go on to one of the other messaging system to continue the recruitment and grooming process. But yes, that's where the connection is being made, is through those chat features.
Yeah, just really quickly, I spoke to someone whose child was actually exploited starting on Roblox. So Roblox is a pretty innocent looking game, but it has a chat feature. And so an adult first masqueraded as a child, created a really strong relationship with the girl was feeling lonely at the time. Her dad, I think, was in jail, going through some things, and moved her off platform to Snapchat and Discord, where she was then extorted into creating CSAM.
Interesting.
Yeah, and Roblox is big. Yeah, that's a big one. Your racing game is big. So those are big games.
Okay, and to segue into the question, are there games in particular that predators tend to use to communicate with children? So Roblox being one.
Yeah, so Danny mentions Roblox, which I stress, and she just gave you a prime example. I've seen that as well. But I would say this: it's not necessarily going to be a particular game. If the game has a chat feature and parents choose to be really unmonitoring that child, you're really kind of throwing them out there, because these predators are more tuned in than we are as to what these games are and where the kids are. And they're very good at getting there. So I would be very mindful of gaming systems, and games in particular that have gaming or chat features in them, or private messaging sometimes within games, because they're susceptible to being recruited.
Understood. Danny, and one last question for you before we move on to our speaker. What is the first step in the process should someone want to reach out for legal assistance in a similar sextortion case or any kind of online exploitation? What is the first step that they would take with NCOSI to get that assistance?
Yeah, go to our website, sexualexploitationlawsuits.com, and there we kind of talk about the issues, educate anyone who's looking for it. And then at the bottom of the page, we have a short questionnaire that someone could just, check a couple boxes, say this happened to me, and then give us their email or whatever preferred method of communication, and we'll reach out.
Awesome. Well, Danny and Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an incredible learning experience for us, and we've certainly enjoyed the content that you provided us today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Danny. Danny's awesome. Reach out to NCOSI. Great organization.
Thank you. Well, it is now time to hear from our event sponsor, Levin Papantonio Rafferty Law Firm. We will hear from Kim Adams to discuss cases and litigation and trends in trafficking, with an update regarding civil litigation on behalf of survivors of human trafficking. A little bit about Kim. Kim Adams has been a litigator and shareholder with Levin Papantonio Rafferty for over a decade and is currently serving as general counsel for the firm. Over the last several years, Mrs. Adams has made it her passion to pursue civil litigation for survivors of human trafficking. She works hand in hand with national anti-trafficking organizations and survivor advocates to support her clients, and frequently speaks publicly to raise awareness about human trafficking. She is committed to changing the perceptions about victims of trafficking and forcing accountability against those who take advantage of our most vulnerable children. Kim is a superhero in my book, and she is here to give some very important information on current litigation. Please help me give a warm welcome to Kim Adams.
Hi, thank you, Sarah. Appreciate the time to be here, and appreciate just being a part of such an important session and an important presentation. A little bit about me. I've been at our firm doing civil litigation for quite some time. And probably 3, 4, 5 years ago, our firm started looking at different statutes that were changing involving sex assault, sex abuse. And one thing I think that we know for sure is the only way we usually see real change is through the civil justice system, especially when we get to what Danny was referring to as beneficiary claims. I've had the privilege of working with Danny, and we work in the same circles and are on some of the same cases, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here as well. But what we did immediately when we decided as a firm, because our firm traditionally was not known for handling those kinds of cases, was we made a commitment and a decision to really engross ourselves in understanding what was the real need. The first need was public perception had to change. Our juries, our judges, they were not really understanding, I don't think, the life cycle of a trafficking victim. They didn't understand how people could not escape. A lot of the things that we've heard this morning was really just ringing true to us, saying, man, we have got to take a stand and let people understand what this is, which takes experts. It takes case litigation work. It takes people who know how to actually litigate a civil case. And that was where we decided we needed to step into this. And so since that time, we hired 2 full-time advocates that talk to all of our incoming clients to make sure they have a safe space, they have a familiar space, that they're able to, and we get clients every single day coming in, and I'll kind of explain to you how the process works. But so we did that, and then we also started working with Carissa Phelps, and unfortunately Carissa is unable to join us this morning, but Carissa is a advocate, a survivor, and most importantly, she's a really great attorney. And we are working together to figure out how do we change perception, how do we change rules and guidelines, and how do we litigate and hold those accountable that have for so long benefited and created these havens for these traffickers. We understand that going after the trafficker criminally, that gets one trafficker off the street, and the next trafficker is waiting in line to pick up that unfortunate female who may be a victim at the time. We know that Johns need to be addressed, right? We know that we've got to work on demand or we're not going to change the scope. But we also knew that we've got to work on these corporations and businesses who are complacent in watching trafficking day in, day out, children sitting on their platforms, sitting in their hotel rooms, sitting in their truck stops, being victimized day in and day out. So we've created this team. We have a really large team. Our firm has been completely supportive of a lot of different organizations on helping make sure the messaging is getting out and making sure that we are doing the right thing, right? We are survivor centered. That is first and foremost. Carissa, as on all of the things that she also has done, she had a business in training, lots of different facilities, and she's helped train our group as well. So why did we get involved? We got involved because we knew that civil litigation was really the only way that we were going to force this real change. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our clients as well, but the main lanes that we handle from a civil litigation perspective is claims against hotels and motels, claims against truck stops, claims against online actors, which is a broad variety, and then joining NACOSI with some claims with regard to online pornography sites, which I'll talk to you a little bit as well. So taking us back, not to get too far in the weeds, but we've had a statute that could hold beneficiary claimants accountable since 2008. When we started looking into this statute and realizing why is this not really being used to its full magnitude, I think it's because no one really wanted to test the waters, right? And so when you look at a perpetrator, you have a claim that you can take them to criminal court. You also have a claim that says, okay, if your perpetrator is maybe NIGARD, you have a civil claim against that direct perpetrator. On the other side, what this statute says is if you benefit from that venture, if you benefit from something that you knew or should have known involved trafficking, then you can also be held accountable. You shouldn't be permitted to profit from the exploitation of our children. And that was something that really rang true. And so back in 2019, we started filing lawsuits. We have filed them all over the country. We've got a number of them in litigation right now, but that was one thing that we tested. Was the court going to permit us to bring a claim against a business who benefited from trafficking? So far, we are on our way. We've handled lots of motions, and we are covered in paper from defendants like Wyndham and Red Roof and all of these major hotel brands. But so far, we have courts who actually understand and have taken the time to try to understand why this is important, right? They've already handled the perpetrator side of this. They've already put criminals in jail. For businesses, it's kind of hard to put an entire business in jail. So they understood the need and the importance that this is how we're going to make a dent in trafficking. So we started moving forward with these cases, as I mentioned. One really important thing, I think, at least especially for this group, is when we deal with prosecutions and convictions, it is very difficult to get those prosecutions and convictions when we're dealing with trafficking survivors. But it is so important for these cases and for the survivor. Why is it important? I mean, it might seem obvious, but one, getting the criminal off the street, but also when we have a convicted trafficker or we have a child under the statute, they are necessarily victims of trafficking. We don't need to prove force, fraud, coercion, which we can prove in 99% of our cases. But as minor victims, minors can't make those choices for themselves. And when we have those trafficking convictions, that kind of helps get over those. The conviction also, many state statutes, and that's another thing that my firm really is involved in, is helping create new legislation. Right? I talked about civil litigation. We've got to have legislation where people understand what is the repercussion when you limit a statute of limitations to bring any claims to 2 years. What is the limitation when Florida, at some point in the past only permitted one expungement or no expungement of a prostitution or a solicitation claim? Those are all extremely important issues, and having those convictions and having those prosecutions, even if they result in a lesser included offense, help these victims get these expungements. They help us fix their credit history. A civil judgment helps to give them a way out, right? A lot of our clients are in just the most tragic and traumatized situations, and they're trying real hard to battle their ways out. And these civil litigations help them understand that they're not alone. They're not on an island. People want to hear what they have to say, and people believe them. And it's giving them a voice. They have a voice with all of you great people that have helped participate in this conference. But this civil litigation, we're hoping, helps give them a voice. We have one client, for instance, who was trafficked at the age of 12. She sat inside a hotel room, month in, month out. Nobody said a word. Despite the efforts, despite the foot traffic in and out of those hotel rooms, despite these grown men coming in to abuse this child, despite the trafficker hanging outside, totally setting appointments through online advertising agencies like Craigslist, no one did a thing except let this child kind of continuously abuse. And she's been abused for a long, long time, right? And so now giving her a platform where she can voice what she has felt, where she can voice, this is how I got here, and this is why I'm here, and I am fighting like heck to get out of here. But it gives them the voice, and I'm really proud of our work. I'm proud that Carissa is here with us, and I'm proud that we're able to give our clients this unique platform. So I talked about kind of why we're doing this. I mean, there's a million reasons why, but also just helping our clients get back on their feet, things that people may not really understand they may need in order to actually, take the next steps. Services, we are always working with a lot of communities on trying to find services for our clients. If we're dealing with civil litigation and mountains of paperwork, and it's 2 of us against 10 of them, we need help with services. So we have a lot of groups that we've worked out, efforts with. The other thing I want to mention, and this is just, again, this federal statute that's giving us the ability right now to move some of these cases and make real change. You see notifications in hotel rooms. You now have seen hotels actually make things mandatory, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But there's a 10-year statute of limitations on that. So when a survivor has become in a safe space, it gives them time to get in a safe space. It gives them time to put the mindset for civil litigation. It's not easy. Civil litigation is not easy. Oh, so important, but it's not easy. And so having this 10-year statute of limitations for a survivor to actually understand who participated in this conspiracy, this venture that put me here. What does it feel like to a survivor who walked past that front desk clerk and no one said a word? What does it feel like for our client who stayed chained under a hotel bathroom stall and no one said a word? What does it feel like, right? Aside from the physical and mental and traumatized situations that they're in, you have this complacency that raises this level of trauma to such a unique and heightened awareness. It's just I get beside myself hearing the stories and hearing the complacency in it. So I talked about hotels. That was one of the first cases that we filed, and we've got a number of them filed. We filed all over the country, which is something, again, that our civil firm has much experience doing, and we're able to get these cases moving in all these different jurisdictions. And, from a hotel, we've named both the parent of the hotel brand, and we've named both the owner of the local property. Some people may say, well, how is the brand like Wyndham or Red Roof or Hilton, how are they on the hook for, or not on the hook? I guess that's a terrible term to say, but it is truthful, right? How are they responsible for what's happening? They're responsible because they set the guidelines. They set what curtains are in, the bedrooms. They set the guidelines for what cereal is on the bar. So they certainly should be setting guidelines for what training is happening at their hotel. They certainly are telling the world that they're doing all of these steps, right? So we are digging into what really is happening. What really did they do when they sign and join with all of these NGOs to portray that they're making this change? What really happened with that? What happened with the local property who doesn't have the resources or the know-how? We want to hold accountable from the top down. I was asked by a federal judge, well, why didn't you just go after the local property who is seeing what's happening? And I said, well, Your Honor, this statute has been on our on the books since December of 2008, and no one has pushed this issue. And it's because we're not starting from the top down. Accountability starts from the top down. And that's what our firm is really focused on doing. Win, lose, or draw, we let them know that we're coming and we want to see some real change. And I think what we have seen is some of the major brands are making changes, right? For real. They're actually making things mandatory. They're hopefully getting more involved. But I promise you this, that we are not going to give up until we make sure that they do. So, what do we see at our hotel brands? Also, we see, condoms. We see remnants of things that are going on. We see door hangers, don't come in this room. We see traffickers using web-based processes donated by the hotel, right? I've got cases where Mr. Trafficker is sitting in the hotel lobby using the hotel Wi-Fi to live stream the rape of a victim in that hotel room. Clearly someone knows what's happening there, right? We see the hotel Wi-Fi being used to access websites like Craigslist, like Backpage when it was still up. How do you think the foot traffic is coming into the hotel without having that knowledge of those online communications? We know that at least at some point, ECPAT, which is a group that had tried to actually put some parameters on for hotels, said things like block out access to Backpage, block out access to Craigslist. They can shut down all kinds of internal systems to make sure that that's not happening. Be a deterrent, not a facilitator. And what we see is that that was not happening. I know Danny's group is doing a great work. They kind of always pull out the dirty dozen when you look at their site. And that's phenomenal work, right? Because they've been able to take out pornography inside the hotel room. We know that these things can happen. We just have to make sure that they know that we know, and that they know we're not giving up. So our clients, to some degree, most of them have at least a hotel aspect as well as this online level, because they're not coming to the hotel. And we've been arguing this to some of our courts. Look, at one point, you had people where prostitution was happening on the street corners. When online came on, like Backpage and Craigslist, and elevated their websites to like the most viewed in the whole world, so did trafficking. No longer did the prostitution happen on the street as much. Now you've got 10, 12 men coming in because of these online advertisements. So I've kind of talked about the hotel side. We've got cases going against both hotels and most major brands. We also have claims against Craigslist. Very, very litigious right now. Clearly, Craigslist wants to take this all the way up to the Supreme Court. As Danny mentioned to you, they're hiding behind a statute that was meant to ignite innovation, right? Online innovation. We all use online. We're not trying to shut down the internet. That's what I keep kind of telling some of these judges and some of my other colleagues. We're not trying to shut down the internet. We're trying to protect against it, right? Our children are being pulled into these pornography sites and websites and being sold. You see the gaming that we just talked about. It's really mind-blowing. And all of these things we feel like could be better mitigated with a lot more protections for our children. So back in 2008, 2009, 2010, Craigslist created an actual page that was called Erotic Services. When NCMEC, which is the National Center Against Child Exploitation, started looking for missing children, they were finding them on Craigslist, right? Craigslist goes to Congress and says, we're the good guys, we want to help. Maybe we should take down this erotic services because that's driving this traffic, right? Prostitution is illegal in most places anyway. When you have a naked child on your site, Backpage or Craigslist, or someone that's scantily dressed and they look very young, what are the protections that you're doing to make sure that that's not happening? Clearly, they could have done those things. They changed their erotic services into adult services. You can look at our complaints and see any of this, these allegations. Carissa had worked very hard on, we've got a case right now out in California where we're getting some good rulings. The courts are still trying to interpret these statutes, but that's why we just kind of have to keep pounding on it. But we've got those claims, like I mentioned, against Craigslist, and very important cases. We feel like they've known all along. That was the importance of bringing that hotel case first, is setting that standard, right? Knew or should have known, as opposed to you're an intentional actor. We think that they probably are intentional actors, but to know that they knew or should have known and they should not have been benefiting. Benefit could be the sale of the hotel room, the sale of the Wi-Fi, promoting their business, adding traffic to their site. Those are all things that could be a benefit. And these are all things that are tested. They've not been tested before. And I feel like our group, and it's a small one, but we're feisty. We are trying to make this law. We're trying to make these moves. The other case that I wanted to talk about a little bit more, Danny kind of mentioned the Doe cases, and that's X videos and Pornhub. What's important about those? And again, we get the question like, well, why can't we watch pornography? Well, because your children are getting on and your children are being exposed, and we have victim after victim after victim being exposed on these online pornography tube sites, channel sites. And what we are asking in these class actions, right? We are asking that put some verification up. Verify who's in the videos. Verify who has the account. Don't let the account be a young woman or the video be of a young woman and the account be of some man who's getting the profit. On all these pornography sites, when all these things are loaded, those sites can be set up so that money funnels to them for the number of downloads, the number of views. All of these things are very tightly integrated, designed to help make things easily accessible. You would not believe the search terms that we have come across. You would not believe the related search terms that are launched by these sites. Very implicit of child pornography, child sex trafficking. I couldn't believe it myself. And so I just want to tell you, I've kind of bounced around a little bit. Unfortunately, I was left by myself today. I have so much passion for these cases, and I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be here and talk with all you that are also in this fight with us. I'm happy to answer any questions that we have. Just know that we're always here. You can call Carissa or myself. We have 4 other attorneys at the firm that are also working in these cases very heavily with us. I think that, I'm just, again, happy to answer any questions that you have. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Kim. Thank you so much for joining us today. Kim, you have been a friend of mine and of the task force for many years, very heavily involved, and your passion shines through all the work that you do. So just want to say a quick thank you to you for all the great work that you and your team are doing. I know that you've spearheaded a lot of that, and so we're just so thankful for you. If anybody has any questions, please definitely put them in the comments and we can get those to Kim. But Kim, can you tell us a little bit about the book that Attorney Papantonio has put out about some of the things that have gone on and things you all have participated in?
Sure. Yes. So my partner, Mike Papantonio, has written a number of legal thriller type books. The first one was with regard to opioids. We're involved in this opioid litigation throughout the country, and he recently has published a book with regard to trafficking. And I have to tell you, Papantonio was probably the first one to really come up with this passion and this idea that, hey, we've got to figure out what's going on. And we started hiring folks through some of our conferences. We have a civil conference that we put on that probably brings in about 1,500 to 2,000 civil litigators. And he took an hour and a half, we both did. We all got up on stage and we educated those civil litigators. And we said, if you don't do anything else when you walk out of here, what are you going to do about what's happening in your backyard? You can handle a drug case all day long. You can handle a product case all day long. But when are you going to step up and start attacking what's happening in your backyard, both with regard to, like I mentioned, these online communications? I kind of skipped over the fact that verifying who's coming on there, but also blocking access. We all go through a 2-step process. You got to have a credit card. You got to, verify your account. That's, those are some of the things that they could have done mountains and moons ago and just never decided to step up to do it. So his book is very thriller-like. It's loosely based on things that we've worked on and things that we've worked through. Anybody that is interested, I'm happy to get a copy over to you to read some of that. But anyone also that's interested, just wants to sit down and talk about, what we have going on, I'm happy to talk with you about it, to figure out how we can help whatever, organizations that could use some civil help behind it. We're kind of open to doing whatever needs to be done. I can again just want to stress that our commitment and the efforts that we are trying to do this outreach, we really are serious about making this change.
We appreciate that, Kim. And there's one thing that we try to drive home here in our community is that there's different layers to this fight and many pieces to the puzzle. And so you may not be a full-time victim advocate and you may not be an attorney, but if you have skill sets and you have passion, you can do a lot in this fight. And that's what you and your team have done, and you utilize your resources and the talents and avenues that you have to help survivors across the nation get access to help that otherwise they wouldn't. And so that is absolutely incredible. Thank you again, Kim, for being here with us today.
Yeah, I'm totally grateful for this opportunity, and with my clients, I love them to pieces. So,
thank you, Kim.
Thanks.
Well, it is about time for our survivor panel. But first, I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the multidisciplinary response team that we introduced at the beginning of this. Like I said, is a collaboration that has been formed for law enforcement, Department of Children and Family Services, as well as our child advocacy centers, that being Gulf Coast Kids House and Santa Rosa Kids House, and victim service providers to come together in a coordinated response. And so we are completing our first phase of this launch with this conference, as I mentioned, and there's going to be so much more to come from this in the next few months and years, and a lot of good opportunity to help wrap our arms around our kiddos and those survivors in our communities to help get them the resources they need and get them the help that they need. And so if you're interested in being involved in that, you can definitely reach out to Gulf Coast Kids House or the NICI Project. We're partners in spearheading this, and so we'd be happy to get you more information about that. We are going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we are going to be joined by Kelsey Hill, and I'll go ahead and introduce Kelsey for you, and then when she comes on, she will introduce our survivor panel. But Kelsey Hill is actually a strong advocate for survivors. She is a part of the NICI Project team. She's the founder of Beyond Beauty, which is a training initiative for the salon and spa industry that we've recently launched. And she has just wrapped her arms around survivors. She is passionate, and we're so excited to have her here today. As I mentioned, she is the founder of the training program for the salon and spa industry and Fashion for More, an annual fundraiser that shares stories of survivors who have found restoration and embraced their true calling in life. Today, she's going to be facilitating a panel with Alicia Tappan, Rachel Timothy, and Tiffany Parker, and we will welcome her to the stage after this quick break. Beyond Beauty by NICI and Fashion for More is going to be joining us. Please give a warm welcome to Kelsey Hill.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much, Sarah. It has been a true honor being able to be a part of this amazing conference today, and also to be able to introduce you to some amazing, empowering women that have turned their circumstances into action. And I'm looking forward to hearing their testimony and their story, and how we can be a better part to help in this fight together. First, I'd like to bring up Alicia Tappan. I actually know Alicia personally. She is incredibly inspiring. She has a novel of credentials here, but I'm going to try to sum up some of this so that she can talk a little bit about how she has gotten to the place that she's in now. Alicia holds a master's in international psychology and is pursuing her PhD currently in forensic psychology crisis management. She has a work experience in trauma, comorbidity of depression, anxiety, trauma among female rape victims, and commercial sexual exploitation of children, that is CSEC. She's a survivor, a leader, and an advocate, and her passion for these anti-human trafficking efforts just go beyond so much. I want to hear a little bit from you, Alicia. If you could tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you have gotten to this point in your life.
Well, thanks, Kelsey. I'm so glad to see you this morning. It's so good to see you. And thanks, Sarah and this team. It's really exciting to be a part of so many initiatives. And I learned a lot along the way, and it's so great. So when you feel like you've got it all together and then you learn something new. So I just commend that. But as Kelsey mentioned, crisis management is kind of my game. So I learned at a young age how to find coping skills really quickly in crisis. I grew up in a small town, and my trafficking experience actually comes at 17 years old by my track coach. And as we mentioned throughout several of these different trainings, you just have to be a child to be vulnerable. And when you understand that being a child and vulnerability go hand in hand, it's easy to become a victim. So that coach, who was a father to the fatherless, he provided this experience for his best athletes so that they could no longer go to college virgins, but also go with good grades and scholarships. And if they sold extra drugs and things on the side, they would make a little extra money. But his best aim, which is what we're talking about still today in 2021, I can't believe, is the same exploitation that I experienced, which was a child pornography situation that was created in his own home with a hot tub, some GHB and date rape drugs, some vulnerable children, and just put them in a hot tub and see what they do. And unbeknownst to us and parents and faculty, he was doing this regularly. There were 33 other female victims in my hometown that experienced this. And so I am still standing kind of solo from that experience, just talking about it in the community. And I got really fired up when I actually identified as a survivor in 2014, even though this happened to me over a decade before that. So I had a one-time experience, which was an initiation, which turned into a summer long of what I experienced as hell. And that turned into 10 years of not understanding and not really learning until I heard what human trafficking was and I met another survivor. And when I started to pair up with other survivors, I realized our stories were all kind of the same. The characters had different names and the settings were different, but the plot still ended with us in shame, guilt, doubt, embarrassment, isolation, self-mutilation. And we still have this lifelong journey ahead of us because that trauma is complex. And so today, I'm really excited to be the program director for The Secret Place, which is an initiative here locally in Northwest Florida to really advocate for survivors in a survivor-led and informed way, but also by providing CSEC services, which include independent living and therapeutic services. We partner with a lot of local organizations, including obviously working with the Gulf Coast Kids House as an advocacy center and NICI as a partner just to be out there advocating with survivors. But we also work with our community leaders. And what we're trying to do, not only educate and make them aware, but show them how they can give back. I believe everybody has a gift and a talent, and you just add anti-trafficking efforts to it. And now you become an expert in the field just by providing a service that they already probably need or want. They just haven't had the opportunity to experience it. So that's what we do as survivors. And I'm so excited to do that today with you guys just talking about that. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I can't wait to continue talking in this conversation with you and hearing more about what you have to say. I really want to get to our next panelist too. Rachel Timothy is such an inspiring woman, very empowering story. She's a survivor of human trafficking, and her story begins at just 9 years old. She's a survivor advocate for a nonprofit called The Guardians Rising. She is now happily married with 4 children and is passionate about raising awareness about human trafficking and letting God use her story however he sees fit. Rachel, thank you so much and welcome today. I'd love for you to be able to tell our audience as well a little bit about how you have gotten here and a little about your story. Oh, we're having trouble hearing you a little bit. There you go. I think we can hear you now.
Okay, so sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for having me. And I thought that I was going to tell you my story is a little bit unique, but ironically, the person who first sold me was also my coach. It was my basketball coach. And I was 9 years old, and it was all started off innocent to me. It was a grooming process. And what I had learned through counseling and everything through the years is he not only groomed me, he groomed the entire community into believing he was a safe person. He was an elder of a church. He was a teacher. He was a coach. And so everybody else trusted him. And I believed that he was safe for me to trust as well. And it was just took little steps after little steps, started with child pornography, with pictures, then videos, and then led into being sold to other people. I did a lot of disassociating as a child. I would kind of separate my two worlds, and I went on trying to act like everything was fine, and parts of me believed everything was okay, until I began hurting so deeply and would have nightmares and would have flashbacks and couldn't understand why. I tried to reach out as a child, and people weren't able to make sense of it because I had acted so happy and okay for years, and now all of a sudden I'm saying these awful things have happened. And so I think one thing that's important to know is kids don't always make sense in their stories. They're not able to put it from A to Z, this is what happened. But something traumatic had obviously happened to me, and I needed somebody to listen. It wasn't until 2017 when somebody finally listened and believed me and said enough is enough. And she was an elder's wife in my church. And she started fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. She took me to police stations. She took me to court. She helped me feel like I was worth fighting for. And as a result, now I'm getting to be a part of the Guardians Rising, where I want to be able to give back. I want to be able to show there's hope for others as well, and that, you're not alone in this. And so I just feel very grateful to get to be here with you guys. I hope I explained that all okay. But yeah.
Wonderful to have you. So glad to hear more about your story, and just kind of tune in with that so we can share more advice and tips to our viewers. Our last panelist that we have coming up is Tiffany Parker. She has over a decade of experience in public service and emergency management as the training and exercise coordinator for the City Hall of Dallas Office of Emergency Management. She designed and conducted Dallas's largest full-scale exercises to date. Tiffany is currently a motivational speaker and educator covering the topic of human trafficking. She is the author and the president of the Downtown Security Directors Association. Tiffany's current culturally and academically diverse experiences in education put her in a position to work in or educate others in a wide variety of public safety arenas, emergency management, and the medical field. So happy to have you and hear your point of view and your personal story and testimony. Tiffany, welcome. Thank you for being here. Tiffany, can you hear us? Thank you so much for being here. Tiffany's having a little bit of sound troubleshooting. I'll try to give her a moment to get on there.
Thank you, ladies. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you so much for being here, Tiffany. I hope you heard.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I can. Can you guys hear me? Uh-oh.
Yes.
I can hear you. I can hear you. Okay.
We can hear you.
Welcome. I did. So let me just preface my introduction with a little story. So life doesn't always give us what we want. If you can tell by my background, I am in a hospital. So my husband was rushed to the hospital on Monday and underwent emergency surgery. So I'm going to give you as much as my time as I can, but do pardon any interruptions you hear over the loudspeaker because the nurses, for some reason, they won't work around my schedule. So a little bit about me. I am an author. I wrote a book about my story called Whispered Like Wildfire, something that really helped with my healing process. So I am the mother, I'm the daughter of a woman that was trafficked. Her trafficker gave her and her friend the option of who got to live and who got to die. And my mom was, unfortunately or fortunately, the lucky one who survived and produced me out of the deal. And so I am blessed to be somebody who can advocate for trafficking victims. I was a victim of rape several times throughout my life and blamed for it over and over and over again. I was raised being taught that because of my looks and how I behaved, that I was the actual perpetrator and not the men that continued to abuse me throughout the years. And that in order to fix my terrible ways, that I had to get married at 16 years old so I would no longer tempt the poor men that were associated with me. And I began to believe that sex was how men showed me that they loved me, whether it was family, friends, coworkers, significant others. And it wasn't until I met my husband in 2016 that he really started to show me that you can love yourself without showing it through sex, and that a man can love you without also showing it through sex. So I've spent the last 4 years advocating for human trafficking victims, educating. I do come from a first responder background, so educating first responders, both law enforcement and the fire department, on trafficking victims, so that when we run calls on trafficking victims, we are not re-terrorizing them, we're not re-traumatizing them. We're actually a safe place for them when they do call 911. So that is a little bit about me. I'll get more into my story during the panel, but I really appreciate you guys letting me be on here.
Thank you so much for being here. And we'll definitely be thinking about your husband as he's on the healing path. As we continue our panel discussion, we are going to be asking some questions to the panelists, and they will be answering. And then at the end, we will be opening our discussion up to our viewers. So as you're listening and viewing at home or wherever you are, be thinking about something you might want to ask these panelists. And if you all are ready for the first question, we can dive right in. This question is for all of you, so whoever would like to jump in and start. The question is from a survivor's perspective. What are some do's and don'ts that are not helpful or can be triggering?
Well, I will go because I wanted to wait, but I think the first thing we already kind of went through this training earlier was understanding language, being very trauma informed and learning how to speak through words of affirmation versus judgment, or, even curiosity can be harmful sometimes. So I think just, understanding helping versus hurting is a way of giving, and understanding love language is very significant in the way we talk. So I feel like body language, that cultural piece, is really important. So language, first of all, would be my first thing, is what is trauma-informed language and where can you get training for that?
That's great.
Yeah, I completely agree. Being trauma informed, as well as I think understanding the emotions that a trafficking victim or survivor has, because shame and guilt is so heavy, and not accidentally putting more of that onto them, maybe questioning some of what they say, or maybe offering advice that isn't quite as helpful. I don't know, just some things to be mindful of in the way of helping can sometimes make it feel like shaming, which could be triggering.
Tiffany, would you like to add to that?
I will mention one thing about, and I will mention one thing about triggering that people don't always understand is a trigger doesn't have to be something normal. So for me, if someone is standing in a doorway when I try to walk there, that is a huge trigger for me. So on the other hand, it's just learning what your survivor's triggers are, because they're not always normal things. I mean, if I get rape shamed or rape blamed, or survivor blamed, that is a trigger, but there are things that you don't realize are triggers until it happens. And it's important, especially for our significant others or people in our family, where we can have that opportunity to say, this is a trigger for me. This is something, because we're all unique in our experiences. We're all unique in our trauma. So it's so specific to your survivor, and something that's really important for like Alicia and I when we are working with survivors is finding out what triggers them, because it's going to be so completely different than what triggers somebody else. So a big do for me is get to know your survivor. What triggers them? Not everybody cares if somebody's blocking the doorway, but for me, that is, a stop all. I can't do anything else. So learning those people and learning what their triggers are is going to be so helpful to you and to them.
Kelsey, can I add something to that real fast? Because I
Of
love
course.
Tiffany's. We have some fun experiences recently that kind of talk to that. But I think if you speak to it as a survival cue, like a survival cue, instead of it as a trigger, because it's not always physical or emotional, right? It could just be this feeling. Somebody told me, you're really good at reading a room. And I was like, well, that's because that's something I taught me how to survive. Well, I know Tiffany's really good at counting exits, right? Put those two together. I mean, we're a dynamic duo. You add one more person who's really good at reading people. We got a really good forensic team right here. So I imagine that it's just these little nuances that kept us alive that we now use as part of our, maybe it's skill building assets or leadership development. We can use it to teach other people how to become safe in their environment, even though we didn't mean to do it as necessarily a thing intentionally at the time.
That's all great advice and really a lot to think about and resonate with us. We're going to go ahead and get into our second question. And this is also directed to everyone. So whoever would like to jump in first, and we can, go back and forth and talk about it as conversationally as we like. The question is, looking back on your testimony with all of the knowledge that you have obtained, is there anything that sticks out to you that you now know is a red flag?
So I can talk about a lot of red flags and stuff that I've experienced, but then other survivors have experienced, and that is the secrecy of a relationship. And I have 7 kids myself, and I always really try to explain to them, anytime somebody wants to make your relationship a secret, there's something going on. That is a huge red flag. If they don't want people to know, my nephew was groomed, and that was the big thing, is they won't understand. Don't tell them. They'll make you feel guilty. And it was, slowly drawing that person in while making it a secret. So that's a big red flag for us. Another one is that person that always wants to dote on you, but never wants anything and they don't want anything back. And at first that seems like, it's such a kind gesture. We've all dated, that person wants to buy you flowers. That's not a red flag. But when it's obsessive, now we're getting the Gucci handbags and the designer jeans, and they don't want anything from you. They're just enjoying your company. That's another big one that we try to tell our kids, is they do want something from you. They're just not telling you yet. And by the time they do tell you, it's going to be too late. So those are 2 big red flags that we see all the time in all of our trafficking victims. And then I'll let the other girls tell the other ones.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to say in my situation, I feel like, I had people ask me, has anybody ever hurt you? And I was going to say no, because I had the grooming experience too, where I didn't want to hurt my trafficker. I didn't want to get him in trouble. But if anybody had asked me, who makes you feel special? Who spends the most time with you? Who gives you things? But the making you feel special, making you feel important was very big in my story. And I feel like sometimes when we're talking to kids, the idea of who's hurt you is maybe scary. But if you talk about, well, who likes to play games with you? Who likes to just be alone or whatever? That can be red flags, in my opinion. There's no reason why a 35-year-old man should have wanted to spend so much alone time with a 9-year-old girl.
What I see really happening today at schools especially is this change of status quo. You usually find a child on one spectrum or the other, and they kind of falter, right? So the more attention they get, all of a sudden their status quo increases, right? But as soon as that shame and guilt and doubt becomes public somehow, you watch that spectrum fall. So those confident girls who are now being trafficked are going to start to deplete and find themselves, not even attending school and really not showing up for their commitments that they had originally signed up for. So I see that, and that kind of goes middle school, high school, and beyond. You can see it at work as well. So they're either, again, elevating in status, or they started high and are now depleting in status because of that association with their trafficking lifestyle.
Wow, just incredible. A lot to think about. Our last question here for me before we open it up to our virtual viewers here. In anti-trafficking work, what are some practical ways that you can advise providers to keep the human in human trafficking reporting? Alicia, I'm going to have you start with this one, and then we can open it up to the other panelists.
Oh, I love this question. Okay, keeping it human. So that's the first thing. I think people get really confused with human trafficking and human smuggling, and we can go all day in that. But that really is the first misconception, is that there's something happening outside of the human experience, right? Drugs, crossing a border illegally, having a job, having a boyfriend, all of that is contingent upon their trafficking situation. But as soon as we identify them, we put them in this box that we have to now pinhole them and give them these specific services in order for them to get care. Well, when we identify survivors and they come for services at the secret place, the first thing we ask them is kind of, well, where are you and what's one thing that you need, right? And they're not going to tell me right away that they need counseling or that they need this or they need that. They don't identify as a human trafficking victim. For me, they're coming because they feel isolated. They need connection. They need someone to help them with maybe some basic needs. And usually that is food, water, shelter. But when we see them and we go, well, who are you? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite food? What's your favorite band? They might be able to answer some of those questions. And if I can get one rapport building thing, I know now I can make a million micro connections off that one thing. So I might show up with everything Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse because that's her favorite thing. And so if I can do that, I know I'm going to get some trust. I know I'm going to get some part of her that is vulnerable to healing and want to know, because there is this level. And then no questions asked and no strings attached, do we now provide those next things and fill those needs? So I believe we don't want to say, hey, here's my model of a program and this is how you need to fit into it. It's like, where are you now and how does our model match you where you're at? And if you're a good fit, let's do this together. If not, I want to refer you to a million other services that are probably better for who you are versus who we are. And I think that keeps it really human again, right? Like we see them for them as a person, not as a criminal, not as a victim, but as their name.
I can jump in and say maybe a little bit for me, where I don't feel like I was felt like a human would be times when I had to go to the hospital and I would have to explain the craziness of what had just happened. And I feel like as soon as I mentioned abuse or assault or rape, heaven forbid I mentioned trafficking, just the fear in the nurse's eyes and the doctor's eyes. I've had nurses who walked out and said they didn't feel safe enough to take care of me. But then I've had the other extreme where doctors have said they think it's in my head. And so just not feeling human in the side of even getting medical care after being hurt is dehumanizing in and of itself.
Tiffany, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I think Alicia said it perfectly.
Yeah, she did. I do have a question from our very own Sarah Lefevers. She would like to add and ask, looking back now, was there a place that you know could have helped you but didn't? And how would you fill those gaps now?
I would like to jump in on that. So there are 3 opportunities where I think there could be so much improvement. The first of that is in the school systems. So nobody sees our children more than their teachers. They're 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That is a place that they can actually be seen and heard, and they're not. Or if they are seen, they don't know, the teachers don't know how to report that. And so filling that gap is education on, and any of the people I'm going to tell you about, all of it's education and teaching them how do you, if you recognize, first of all, here's how to recognize a human trafficking victim or a child abuse victim or any other form of victim. Here's how to recognize them. And now here's a good way to respond to them so that you are not re-traumatizing them. And here are the right people to go to. We do have a trafficking victim that we work with at Reclaim, and her trafficker was her mom. Well, one of the people that was her buyers was the principal. So when the teacher went to the principal with, hey, I think there's something going on, all she was doing was going to one of the traffickers, which, it's hard, and that was a small town and that's not everywhere, but going to the right people. Who are the right people to go to when you feel like something's going on? Another of those are law enforcement and fire department. We need to teach people, especially our law enforcement, that's, my biggest passion is teaching them how to be a safe haven for trafficking survivors. Somewhere that when they go there, they know that those law enforcement are not going to re-traumatize them, but they're going to help them and they're going to get them the need that they want. But again, that comes through education. So the biggest gap anywhere, any system, whether you show up at the hospital, just like she was mentioning, they don't feel safe going in there. They don't believe them. That's because they haven't been trained on it. And people don't believe that human trafficking is something that happens in Perfectville, USA. It happens in China and in Afghanistan, but never, ever, ever in the US. And so we need to educate them. We can't just assume everybody knows. I've worked in the fire department, I've worked in the hospital, and people just they're blind to it. Unless it is happening to you, they do not believe it's happening. So we need to educate them. That is the best way that we can fill those gaps with anybody. And then kids, when they're not scared to cry out because that person is going to help them. That's all I have to say.
Amen to all of that. Yes.
Yes, that was very good.
And Tiffany, you said it, and somebody said it earlier. It was really, really good. It was Holly. She said it wasn't about like, hey, what did you do? It was, hey, what happened to you? The question, like, alone will take a person who has been victimized and go, hold on, yeah, you're right. Like, there was an element of this that I didn't control, right? And so for me, it was that, like, again, in a school setting, my dad's friend, who was the advisor of one of the organizations I was a leader in, said that question in the wrong way. She said, I heard about your reputation. We need you to step down. Instead of, what happened to you, Alicia? Something really has changed from what I've heard over this summer. What's going on? And so just being taken seriously in the moment, whether or not they have come forward, but they've said something or someone has said something, right? We suspect abuse. We have to report suspicion of abuse just as much as valid evidence of abuse. And especially in the state of Florida, we're mandated reporters. So when we speak now to guidance counselors and social workers, and we're hearing that these girls are being addressed every single day, catfished by traffickers randomly on social media platforms in every level of social media, not even the Holy Bible app is like removed from this situation because it has a chat function. And so they're being addressed every single day, every day. We know it's happening. So we don't have to assume that they're at risk. They're at risk. Now we want to know what part are they influenced by and how committed are they into this, that grooming process that, what was this? I'm sorry, Alan talked about earlier. I really appreciated that because I was saying like we could have been caught. I'm guessing, Rachel, you 9 years old, somebody should have seen something and then said something. And so part of what we do at the Secret Place now is we're finding that parents just need that confidence, that support and encouragement to help report what they're seeing amongst their kids as friends. And so we have a due diligence, as adults who are educated or at least know something to do some sort of report. And I feel like as a community, we should rally around that education, but not just the education. Sit down with families and show them how to do it. Get on the website with them and do it with them so they're not scared of the unknown, right? Because that's going to lead us back into trafficking. So we just want to make sure that I think, if you see something, say something.
Yes. And sometimes just don't stop with telling one person. Keep going because, I had heard stories now way after the fact. Well, she's put 5 up. Tell 5 people. I agree. Because I hear stories now of people who did see signs. They saw me with him alone, saw things happening, and they told one person who then shut it down. And yeah, tell 5 people at least.
I have a follow-up question related to this. As our viewers are listening and tuning in and hearing, the advice that you're giving and your feedback from your testimonies, as someone who's newer to human trafficking awareness and they're listening in today, what is a step that they can take initially to take action?
I said it earlier, and if you can hear me, I'll say it again. Do what you're already doing really well and add anti-trafficking to it. Put flyers at your store, put the hotline somewhere on a window, put a bumper sticker on your car, text Be Free if you're having a hard time. They're already, like, we already have industries doing really great things, making really great products, doing really great awareness pieces. You don't have to add more. You don't have to do something different. Invite a speaker. Pay Tiffany to fly across the country and come teach your, law enforcement organization. Have Kelsey come in and talk to your salon people. Like, you know what I mean? We're already doing things in our community as business owners and organizational professionals. So how can you just add anti-trafficking efforts to it?
That is wonderful advice. I think we're going to start opening up to some questions from our viewers. So as those start to come in, if any of our panelists have anything that they'd like to add as we get those questions here for you.
Can I do a quick
I
plug?
see a question from Abby. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I see a question from Abby. She asked if we were able to connect with schools and educate children on abuse and trafficking. I can tell you that my organization, we do go to schools. We actually bring along a trafficking victim who was trafficked in her school. So we do educate children. I don't ever think that there's enough education with children. And right now, trafficking is such a new crime. I mean, it's only been illegal for 21 years. So it's so new to our communities that I still don't think there's nearly enough education. I think I've mentioned education every single time I've spoken because it's so important. So my organization, yes, we do connect with schools. It is more important for us to connect with the teachers because we want them to see the signs, but we do definitely connect with our kids. The absolute best thing that you can do is talk to your kids and talk to your kids' friends, because that is how you are going to get it out. That is how can you help? Talk to your kids, talk to your neighbor's kids, talk to the kid across the street, be that weird person that talks to the kid in the grocery store. I don't care. Talk to the kids. But our big thing is we want to talk to the adults who can see those kids and they can speak for them. Oh, I saw another, and I have to answer this one. I'm sorry, ladies, and you guys can jump back. Why is it so high? All right, I don't know if anybody's shared the story yet, but I'm going to. All right, so if I buy a bag of Skittles and I give Alicia my Skittles, I have got to go buy a new bag of Skittles before I can buy Alicia more Skittles. I can't just keep giving her my Skittles because they're all gone. However, I can give Alicia my daughter, and then I can give Kelsey my daughter, and then I can give Rachel, and it is just a product that I can keep using over and over and over. But if I want to share my Skittles with everybody, I've got to go buy more. So the drug trade. Don't just go to Walmart and get more drugs. You got to go to another country. You got to get the drugs from Mexico. You got to smuggle them into the United States or wherever you're selling them. You got to sell them, and eventually they're going to run out, and you got to go back. And it's such an arduous process trying to get more drugs into the country, more arms into the country, more whatever you want to call it. But it is so easy. Is that me?
You're back on now. We can hear you now.
It's everywhere. And that is why it's so high, because it is such an easy target. Humans are such an easy target, and all you got to do, if there's anybody from hospitals here, all you've got to do is go get them a checkup every once in a while for an STD, and then you can keep on going. Okay, I don't know where I stopped at. Did you guys hear everything?
Pretty much. You only cut out for just a second.
Okay, yeah. So
Wonderful.
the humans are just the gift that keeps on giving for criminals. And that is why it's so high, because they saw how easy of a criminal industry this is. And that is why it has gotten so high and so big, because our children are vulnerable. Think of the access they have to the internet. It is so easy to jump on a video game and groom a child, and that child is just so vulnerable. So that is, and okay, sorry, I'm getting a lot of questions, but I want to open it up to the other girls. But you tell them it is happening here. It's happening to your kids. It's happening to your cousins. It's happening to your nieces. The biggest places that it's happening, rich white communities. And those are the people, well, it's not happening here because we're rich and we're in this beautiful little community. I live in this little small town with all upper class people. We don't have any homeless people in my town. We don't have any trailer parks. I just live in this beautiful, well, tight-knit community. It's not happening here, but it is. And think of the Epsteins and everybody else in the Me Too movement. Where did that start? That didn't start in China. That started here with a bunch of rich people who had nothing better to do than find something new to play with. So anytime someone says that won't happen here, open up your Google and you can show them 10 million places where it is happening right in your hometown. It is happening to your neighbor's child. And if you don't believe me, Google it and you will see how much it's happening. I'm going to get off my soapbox and let one of these other ladies answer these questions.
Thank you. I think that's what is one of the more disturbing realities of this pandemic, is that these predators are looking at, this is a business. These humans are a lucrative business that can just keep, it's a revolving door that can just be sold and sold and sold. And I think that is the harsh reality that so many of our community members need to understand, is that it is looked at as a business and we need to shut it down. So I'm going to ask this question to Rachel. Scroll back up here really quick. As service providers in organizations, we strive to be a voice for the voiceless. But in your opinion, are there ways that we can better amplify the voice of survivors versus trying to be a voice for them?
Goodness. Yeah. I mean, I think the encouragement behind the scenes that I have received from people, just providing me with prayer and support and spending time with me and encouraging me to not be afraid of my own voice, not to think that my voice doesn't matter, because I've had people who have fought for me and they started the process. When I couldn't fight for myself, they stepped in and they fought for me. But through the years, it has then had to be me that has said, okay, I'm going to continue this fight. And together, I have a good friend of mine who says, just like the story in the Bible, when Moses needed help holding his arms up with the staff in order for the Israelites to cross the Red Sea, you need people to hold you up while you're fighting this battle, because you cannot do it alone. But there comes a point when almost you can become a trafficker in and of it yourself by being their voice for them and making their decisions for them, making them see what type of person they are. For a long time, I couldn't tell you what my favorite color was. I couldn't tell you what things I liked. And I'm still learning that. But giving me a chance to learn for myself who I am and then being able to speak up for myself is empowering. And it's part of the healing process.
Absolutely. Alicia, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, she did a great job. I think that that's where we have to meet the survivors, is just realizing that the voice isn't going to be there for a while, and to know what they want in order to speak it. So the best thing we can do is just listen. And if they're like, well, we don't have an answer for that, like, where's she going to live? Well, we don't have an answer for that. Right. But what we know right now is that we're checking in regularly. And if we can get them to just stay in communication with allies, because you're building those trusts and you're really, like she said, just fighting the battle for her, that's what we're going to do. Right. And we might do it in silence.
It's very true. I'm going to have you stay on, Alicia, and just go ahead and take on this question for me. In the documentary Blind Eyes, opened that Alan was in 88% of trafficked persons had come through the medical facility. in your knowledge, is there a program that's available for a medical field and professionals?
Well, first of all, SANE nurses, the sexual assault nurse examination RNs, there is a whole niche there that needs to be developed across the nation. I know right now we have 33 potential medical facility places where they can do these SANE examinations, and only 18 of them are actually active in Florida. So that blew my mind when I learned that. So we actually co-hosted a training, and we're really excited about doing it again, because I think, if we can find out how to make that a more individualized and appropriate approach to what we're doing for services, especially in the medical field, we aren't really trauma informed. Most of the services that human trafficking survivors and victims experience is going into the ER. And it becomes almost like a show. If they make it through the administration without being triggered, then it's like all of the law enforcement in, their patrol officer uniforms with these agency people coming in their uniforms, with these victim services people coming in, and it's all being done in the ER where crisis is happening, right? And we get that makes sense, that we have the equipment there, we have the professionals there, but what we need for people in this particular situation and vulnerability is that privacy entity. We don't need it on display. It's already been on display. They were rape victims. They were exploited online, right? They were already exploited in their home. They were already exploited at school. Like, do we need to go do it while we're trying to help them? So I would say that's the best thing that we can do is, in the medical field, invest in a SANE nurse practitioner, invest in that education for their staff, really get from the admin level all the way through surgeons and doctors and the big business, right? They need to be trained, but really providing more options for survivors to get the care they need in the appropriate way that they need it.
All right, as we start to wrap up these questions with these amazing, empowering women panelists today, I just wanted to ask each and every one of the panelists as we, wrap this up, what is one, we have so much information that we have covered, so what is one piece of advice that you would like to give a current victim to be able to get the support or a tip that they could help to give them encouragement in this situation?
Well, I can go. And I would say just don't feel crazy about.
I can add to that as well. For clinicians, my organization, Reclaim 611, we do educate. Oh, just kidding.
Sorry about that. Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. I was just going to say, one of the times when I was talking with police officers and I was sharing my story, and it was, it was horrendous. It's not an easy thing to share. One of the things the officer said to me is perpetrators often do the craziest crap to you on purpose so that people won't believe you. And so if your story is unbelievable and you think absolutely nobody's going to believe you, you're going to have to live with this the rest of your life, because it's not something somebody's going to sit beside you and say, I get it. You're not alone. Like, it's not too crazy. This stuff happens, and there are people out there who will believe you. And so please, please, please keep trying, finding people, reach out to some of these women on here, reach out to some of these organizations, because your story's not too crazy to believe, I promise you. And there's people who want to help.
Tiffany, would you like to add to that? I think Tiffany may be having some connection issues. So Alicia, I'll have you go ahead and close that out for me.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. And I know Tiffany would probably back me in this. And it just sounds what Rachel said, and it's not cliche, right? There's a network of survivors out there that are doing incredible things, who want to take time and just be with each other. We hosted our first survivor retreat here in Northwest Florida, and it was just an awesome experience.
Yeah, I
to
was just going to
Go.
say, so our organization, Reclaim 611, we are all medical professionals. Our founder is a nurse practitioner. So if you do work for a hospital or a fire department, a police department, even if you guys can't afford training, call us. We will, whether it's free training or whatever training that your organization needs, it is so important to us. Oh, okay. Okay.
She's on a delay, I think.
Tiffany, we'll make sure to put your information for Reclaim 611 for any medical professionals in our comment section. We're going to get back to Alicia so she can finish up her response, and then I will close out our panel.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for giving me the mic back. I hate it for her because I know how hard she works, and she just really is in that situation. And that's, again, another reason why you have a survivor network, because when there's emergencies like this and, things that are coming up, we do get it, right? Like, we have been through the crazy, like Rachel said. We've been through the things that didn't work, and I think that that's what I would tell a survivor today, right? Find someone in your community who knows something about human trafficking, who can link you up with someone who's a part of a survivor-led initiative, right? And then partner and try to find a mentor or mentee. You might have to go to a program. And I hate that for that to be the answer for survivors, but there is a bunch of really good organizations out across the nation really trying to bring the heart back in humanity, back into the healing process and journey for trafficked victims. We couldn't do it 20 years ago. And in 20 years from now, we'll have better, staff, better equipped teams. But my favorite part is, if you can be a survivor leader in your area, don't be afraid to reach out. Just get equipped. I know there's initiatives that are there to support you and become a better voice for the voiceless.
Thank you so much, Alicia, and thank you, Rachel and Tiffany, as well, for being able to share not only your story, but your initiatives and how you are changing the lives of so many through education, awareness, and your story. I know personally, with being an advocate myself, being able to take tips away from yourselves and your stories today, and even apply it to the things that I am doing to also work in this fight, I will hold dear and be resonating on forever. And I appreciate your testimonies and your feedback from your point of view. And today has been an amazing conference. And we're going to go ahead and exit out of this panel and again say thank you. And I'm going to take it back over to Sarah so she can thank our sponsor for today. And have a blessed day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelsey. And Rachel, Alicia, Tiffany, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your stories with us and giving us guidance on how we can be better advocates for survivors as we seek to try to help and do something, because everybody wants to do something. And so your guidance means a lot to us. I've been at tables where programs and procedures have been discussed, how we can best help survivors, but there's not been a survivor present at that table. And I will tell you, none of those initiatives or programs end up working, because we have to have survivors such as yourselves in the fight with us at the table, advising us on how we can best help. And so we certainly appreciate you and your survivor advocacy and leadership. So I just wanted to say another thank you to you. Well, my cup is certainly full from today. It has been a fantastic event, and we are so thankful for all of you who chose the fight with us today with all kinds of demands and to-dos at this time of the year. You chose to be here and to learn and to know more, and so we just are so thankful. Thank you again to the NICI Project team for helping put this on for our HT-MDRT, and like I said, more information to come and how we're going to incorporate our survivor, our providers at the next phase, and we really want to have a full community effort going here in the new year. And so we're really excited about that. Gulf Coast Kids House, for your continued leadership and advocacy, a cornerstone of our community. You've been here doing this fight for so long, and we're just so happy to come alongside of you and partner. And of course, to Levin Papantonio Law Firm, an amazing advocate and partner in this fight, doing so much work that you got to learn a little bit about today and hopefully more in the future. And we're just so thankful for the partnerships. We did go over a few local resources for you to volunteer your time or to get more information about. I definitely would encourage you, reach out to the Circuit 1 Human Trafficking Task Force, find out more information about those organizations, those being Class Kids, Call to Rescue, Shada Dance Company, Change Unchained, The Secret Place, Set Free Refuge, Magdalene's, the Nisi Project, the Circuit 1 Task Force, and the Pensacola Dream Center. We're so thankful for your time today. Again, thank you. I've enjoyed my time with you, being able to MC this event and learn alongside of you. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. But first, one more thing, and I almost forgot, a few things for you to immediately get involved in. So this has been motivational and inspirational, but what's the call to action? Well, we've got a few things coming up. January 15th, the Nisi Project is hosting our volunteer orientation with another trauma-informed session with Holly Jeffrey, hoping to have her here in person for that event, following up with a Nisi orientation and onboarding for volunteers if you're interested in getting a fight for immediate response and providing resources to survivors as soon as they're brought out of their rescue and helping them get to an aftercare facility. Please join us. We'd love to have you a part of our team. Also, January 20th, the Circuit 1 Human Trafficking Task Force from 5:30 to 8:30 is putting on their annual Human Trafficking Summit. This event is also going to be very integrated with survivor mentorship as well as trauma-informed training. If you can see, there's a theme going on here in our community. So we hope you'll be able to attend that. That's going to be at the University of West Florida, and you can find out more information on their Facebook page. And then also just a quick reminder, it is National Human Trafficking Month. You'll see a lot of resources shared on social media. Wear blue on January 11th. That's the specific day that we link arms and fight this fight together. Wear your blue, share content and information from our local providers, and try to learn more, get involved. We all have a part of this fight, and so we hope that you will join us wherever is best fit for you. And so again, thank you again for being here, and we hope that you have a very, very Merry Christmas.